Above the Demon King's lair, the final battle between humanity and the forces of darkness had finally reached its end. On that brutal battlefield, Eftal, who was middle-aged at the time, stood beside his hero party. They risked their lives against the gigantic Demon King, a monster with overwhelming power, capable of crushing their entire formation with just one small mistake. But after countless coordinated attacks from his comrades, Eftal finally found the decisive opening. Gathering all of his mana, he unleashed an extremely powerful lightning spell, striking the Demon King directly. A massive bolt of lightning tore through the sky, shattering the darkness covering the battlefield and completely ending the Demon King's life. The long war between humanity and the demon race had finally come to a close. Peace was brought back by the hands of the heroes themselves. Not long after, in the royal capital, the king held a grand ceremony to honor those who had saved the world. Amid the cheers of the citizens and the admiring eyes of the crowd, the great mages representing the mighty elements were called forward one by one. Fire, earth, water, and wind. Each of them had devoted their power to the battle. Because of their sacrifice, the king decided to grant them the title of sovereign, a noble rank once reserved only for those of royal blood. And then came Eftal's turn, the mage who had used lightning to deliver the final blow. The king personally stepped forward, placed a crown upon his head, and granted him the title of the Thunder Sovereign. That moment brought Eftal to tears. After more than 40 years of devoting his entire life to magic, after so many years of fighting, researching, and pushing himself forward without rest, his efforts had finally been recognized by the world in the highest form possible. But that glory was not the end of Eftal's journey. Many years later, when his hair had turned completely white and old age had left its marks on his face, he became a teacher at a magic academy, continuing to pass his knowledge on to the next generation. Inside the classroom, Eftal guided his young students as they maintained a fourth-tier magic circle. He patiently observed every movement of their mana. He was strict, yet gentle, like someone who had lived long enough to understand that the foundation was the most important part of magic. Among those students was Merlin, a young girl who always looked at Eftal with admiration and a strong desire to go even further. After finishing her assignment, Merlin immediately begged her teacher to let her learn 6th-tier magic. She believed that if she became stronger, she could become his #1 disciple. That request reminded Eftal of the past. Many years ago, on a ruined battlefield, after a fierce clash, he had heard the cry of a newborn baby among the wreckage. That baby was Merlin. Even though he knew she carried the blood of the demon race, the sworn enemy of humanity, Eftal could not abandon such a fragile life. He carried her out of the battlefield, brought her home, and raised her as his own. Because of that, to Eftal, Merlin was not just his student. She was the child he had personally rescued from the darkness of war. He understood her potential better than anyone, but he also knew that power given too early could easily cause its user to lose control. Caring deeply for Merlin, Eftal gently refused her request to skip ahead. He told her to first master 4th-tier magic properly. Only when her foundation became strong enough could she reach higher levels without putting herself in danger. But Merlin was still just a young girl desperately wanting to prove herself. She did not want to remain protected by her teacher forever. Even more than that, she could not bear to watch the aging Eftal continue carrying every burden on his own. So, despite her teacher's warning, Merlin secretly took her staff and went alone into the Forbidden Forest. The only thought in her mind was that if she could defeat the monster inside the cave with her own hands, she would prove herself as the greatest disciple of the Thunder Sovereign. She believed that by becoming stronger and accomplishing something truly great, she could shoulder some of Eftal's heavy responsibilities, allowing the teacher she respected so deeply to finally rest with peace of mind. But the moment Merlin stepped into the depths of the forest, she encountered a gigantic magical beast in the form of a red wolf. Facing the terrifying pressure of the monster, Merlin immediately cast the 4th-tier magic she had just learned. However, her attack could not deal any meaningful damage. Only then did the young girl finally realize she had been far too confident. The enemy before her was not a monster a young student could handle alone, and everything she had prepared was nowhere near enough to save her life. The giant red wolf quickly chased after her. Fear threw Merlin's steps into chaos. While desperately trying to escape, she tripped and fell right in front of the beast's claws. Just as she was about to be killed, her teacher appeared. Seeing Merlin nearly lose her life because of her impatience, Eftal could not help but scold her in a stern voice. But even while reprimanding his student, he showed no fear toward the gigantic beast in front of him. With a single raise of his hand, Eftal calmly cast a 10th-tier magic spell. A brilliant light instantly exploded through the forest, destroying the monster so easily that Merlin could only stand there in stunned silence. To Merlin, that was the absolute power of the greatest teacher in the world. But to Eftal, this moment was a lesson he wanted her to remember. Impatience only creates fragile strength, and the more someone rushes toward the top, the easier it is to lose the foundation that matters most. After the incident in the Forbidden Forest, Merlin was brought back to the academy. She still felt guilty for disobeying her teacher, but deep inside, her worry for Eftal only grew stronger. The reason she had acted so recklessly was not simply to prove herself, it was because she had already noticed his declining health. When Merlin brought water to her teacher, she accidentally saw Eftel coughing up blood. That scene caused the anxiety she had been hiding to finally overflow. She admitted she knew Eftel's illness was getting worse, which was why she wanted to become strong as quickly as possible to take over his burdens. Hearing that, Eftel was no longer angry. He gently patted Merlin on the head and admitted he truly did not have much time left. That was why he wanted to use his remaining days to train talented successors, people who could continue walking farther down the path he had never been able to complete. Merlin immediately objected. In her eyes, Eftel was the Thunder Sovereign, the strongest man in the world, a mage who could cast 10th tier magic as easily as breathing. She could not accept the idea that he would see himself as someone with limits. But deep inside, Eftel understood the truth better than anyone. The title of Thunder Sovereign might make the world admire him, and the achievement of defeating the Demon King might make him a hero. But he had never been a true genius. Compared with brilliant young people like the Flame Sovereign, prodigies who naturally reach the peak through their inborn talent, Eftel understood that he was only someone who had been forced to struggle desperately. He had to work tens or even hundreds of times harder than others just to stand on that battlefield. Just as the atmosphere between teacher and student became heavy, a student rushed into the room with shocking news. The Flame Sovereign had finally completed the theory behind the magical aptitude testing solution, a study that had long been considered impossible. The news immediately caught Eftel's attention. If this theory was real, humanity would finally be able to measure a person's magical aptitude through a clear method, instead of relying only on instinct or battle achievements. Without hesitation, Eftel began preparing the testing solution. The testing method itself was highly unusual. All they had to do was take one strand of hair from the subject, then place it into 4 test tubes filled with magical water corresponding to the 4 elements: fire, earth, water, and wind. Based on the light and color reaction inside each test tube, a person's aptitude could be evaluated by rank, from E as the lowest to S as the highest. Merlin was the first to be tested, and her results shocked everyone. Her aptitude for water and wind both reached rank S, her earth aptitude reached rank B, and even her fire aptitude reached rank C, an incredible result for such a young student. Those numbers proved what Eftel had always believed. Merlin truly was a child with extraordinary potential. As long as she was trained properly, she could reach a realm that even Eftel's generation might never touch. But immediately after, the excitement of the students turned toward Eftel himself. Everyone wanted to know just how terrifying the magical aptitude of one of the 4 sovereigns would be. In their eyes, the Thunder Sovereign would surely produce results far beyond everyone else. Eftel hesitated at first, but in the end, he agreed to take the test because he wanted the answer too. Even though he had lived his entire life alongside magic, and even though he had fought to the very end to be recognized, he had always wondered whether he possessed even the smallest trace of natural talent. He understood he could not reach the peak of magic by walking the path of a genius, but after more than 40 years of endless effort, a tiny hope still remained in Eftel's heart. Perhaps he was not completely empty after all. But when Eftel's hair was dropped into the 4 test tubes, no light appeared, no color changed. All 4 test tubes remained transparent and silent in a way that felt almost cruel. In that moment, the entire room sank into complete silence. Eftel could only stare at the result before him, the result that denied the final hope he had secretly kept inside his heart. Then, the shocked voice of a student rang out as he read from the theory paper, colorless and transparent, meaning no aptitude. That single sentence pierced straight into the heart of the Thunder Sovereign. The man who had once saved the world, defeated the Demon King, and been honored as one of the 4 sovereigns, had finally discovered that he had absolutely no magical aptitude. The bitterness of that truth was overwhelming. The glory of Eftel's entire life had not come from talent, but from the desperate effort of a man who had never been blessed by heaven. And that cruel truth would lead directly to the regret of his final days, driving his decision to reincarnate in order to challenge the peak of magic once again. Many days later, Eftel lay bedridden during the final days of his life. His body had completely weakened and his breathing grew faint. But in those aged eyes, the regret he carried never disappeared. Even though the world praised him as a hero, Eftel could not leave this life in peace. What he held in his final moments was not satisfaction, but the resentment of a mage who had never reached the true peak of magic. Tears fell from his eyes as he kept repeating that he could not accept it. He could not accept that a lifetime of effort still could not surpass natural talent. He could not accept that after sacrificing everything, he was still held back by his own limits, running out of time before he could take one more step toward his dream. And then, the Thunder Sovereign Eftel passed away. But his soul did not completely disappear. Thanks to a hidden skill called Reincarnation cycle, which he had obtained 50 years earlier, Eftel opened his eyes inside an undefined space. There, a goddess was waiting to guide him into a new life. The goddess acknowledged Eftel's unbelievably persistent will, a soul rejected by talent itself, a soul that had died with regret, yet still refused to let go of the desire to reach the peak. She told him that he would be reincarnated once more. This would become his third life, a new chance to begin again and chase the dream he had left unfinished. Not only that, the goddess also planned to grant him special abilities, such as the power to double his growth speed to make his new life easier. But Eftal smiled and refused. To him, the most important thing was not a privilege, a reward, or a shortcut to becoming a genius. He said that all the magical knowledge he had accumulated throughout his life was already inside his mind. What he truly needed now was only time. As long as he had enough time, Eftal would continue researching, training, and moving forward with his own hands, just as he had always done. After making his agreement with the goddess, Eftal woke up in the body of a 4-year-old boy. This time, he was born into a peaceful family, with a gentle mother who loved him dearly. At first, his memories were still unclear, but when he ran to the mirror and saw the young face reflected before him, every memory of his life as the Thunder Sovereign came flooding back. The battle against the Demon King, the royal ceremony, the Magic Academy, Merlin, and the bitter moment he learned he had no aptitude. Eftal understood that he had truly reincarnated, and the chance he had once longed for was finally right in front of him. But even after beginning a new life, the obsession with aptitude never disappeared. The first thing Eftal did was recreate the magical aptitude testing solution with his own hands to test his current body. On the quiet grass field, he dropped his own strand of hair into the 4 test tubes, still holding a small hope in his heart. Perhaps in this new life, fate would give him a different result. But reality did not change. All 4 test tubes remained transparent. They did not shine, they did not change color, and not a single magical reaction appeared. That meant even after reincarnation, Eftal was still colorless. Still someone without any natural magical aptitude. He lay back on the grass and quietly looked up at the sky. A faint uneasiness rose inside his heart. If he still had no talent, would this life simply repeat the same tragedy? Even if he had been given more time, would he still be stopped by the wall of genius once again? But before Eftal could sink deeper into those thoughts, the sky above the royal capital suddenly turned dark. A gigantic dragon with glowing red eyes appeared. Its wings covered the sky, and the terrifying aura pouring from its body threw the entire area into chaos. The knights on horseback quickly realized that the difference in power was far too great. They had no chance of fighting such a monster, so their formation instantly broke apart as they turned and fled in panic. At first, Eftal also thought that a 4-year-old child like him could not possibly do anything. His current body was far too small, and his mana should not have been enough to stand against a gigantic dragon. But in the next moment, his eyes changed. Even though his current body was only that of a child, inside Eftal still lived the soul of the Thunder Sovereign. The man who had defeated the Demon King spent his entire life researching magic and created original spells with his own hands. He decided to try using the original magic from his previous life. A gigantic green magic circle instantly appeared in the sky. Mana gathered violently in a single moment, and a destructive bolt of lightning shot straight toward the dragon. The 10th tier spell struck so fast that no one could react. The gigantic dragon, which had just thrown the entire royal capital into fear, was instantly blasted down from the sky. Everyone who witnessed the scene was left speechless. Right before their eyes, a 4-year-old child had destroyed a dragon with a single spell. As for Eftal, he quietly looked down at his small hands, then smiled in complete astonishment. Only now did he realize the most important truth. Even though he had reincarnated into the body of a child, he still retained all of the magical power he had possessed at the peak of his previous life. In other words, Eftal had not only carried over his memories and knowledge, he had also carried the mana, techniques, and battle experience of the Thunder Sovereign into this new era. Even though he was still colorless, and even though he still had no natural talent, this time, Eftal was no longer starting from zero. And at that moment, the next life of the Thunder Sovereign truly began. The man once rejected by talent would now use all the knowledge, experience, and power he had accumulated from the past to walk once again on the path toward the peak of magic. 3 years had passed since Eftal awakened the memories of his reincarnation. The young boy had gradually grown used to his new life, and after quietly investigating his surroundings, Eftal finally confirmed an important truth. This world was 400 years after the era he had once lived in. In other words, the achievements of the Thunder God Sovereign had long since become distant legends, and Eftal himself had been reborn as a child who was treated like an unwanted burden by his own descendants. At this time, the person who often visited Eftal and his mother was Frazier, his older half-brother. Every month, Frazier quietly brought them living expenses, allowing Eftal and his mother to continue surviving in this remote land. Through Eftal's narration, the truth about his family background was slowly revealed. His father was an important figure in the Azure Kingdom. Not only that, he was also a descendant of the Thunder God Sovereign. In other words, he was a descendant of Eftal's previous self. On paper, that sounded like being born into an incredible bloodline. But the problem was that Eftal's mother had no magic aptitude, and in a society that worshipped magic, that alone was enough for her to be looked down on. The lawful wife of the family did not respect her. The other people in the household did not treat her with dignity either. In the end, Eftel and his mother were pushed out to this isolated place, forced to live like outsiders within their own family. Eftel had never even been acknowledged by his biological father. He had never met the man in person. The irony was almost cruel. That family proudly claimed to carry the blood of the Thunder God's sovereign, while the real Thunder God's sovereign himself had been pushed aside and forgotten. Fraser, however, was different. He was the second son of the official wife of Duke Alcott, but he did not join the rest of the family in hating Eftel and his mother. Instead, he quietly looked after them. He helped them with money, and he also cared about the future of his younger brother. When Eftel said that he wanted to attend the Magic Academy in the imperial capital one day, his mother immediately burst into tears. In her eyes, that path had already been blocked from the very beginning. The reason was simple. The magic testing system of this era had already concluded that Eftel had no aptitude, just like his mother. For an ordinary person, that result was almost a death sentence for the dream of becoming a mage. And it was even worse for Eftel, because he had been born into a family that believed magic was everything. Because of that, both his mother and Fraser wanted him to change direction and focus on swordsmanship instead. Fraser even advised him that if he entered the Officer Academy, he could still have a very good future. Fraser himself had once graduated at the top of the Officer Academy, so he understood the current military system very well. At the moment, the army greatly valued magic swordsmen. These were fighters who could use swords in battle while also supporting themselves with mana on the battlefield. But for Eftel, that was not the path he truly wanted. During outdoor training sessions, Fraser personally taught Eftel swordsmanship and military knowledge, and just as expected, Eftel learned extremely quickly. His talent for swordsmanship was also very good. If he chose this path, his future would definitely not be bad. However, the more they trained, the more Fraser noticed one problem. Eftel's movements always had a slight excess to them. It was not because he was bad with the sword, it was because his heart had never truly been placed into the blade. Even though his current body was only that of a child, inside Eftel still lived the soul of a great sage who had spent his entire life pursuing the path of magic. How could someone like that obediently give up on magic just because a few test tubes said he had no talent? So when Fraser once again said that Eftel was not suited for the path of magic, Eftel rejected the idea directly. He wanted to enter the Magic Academy. He wanted to continue the path of the great sage. He wanted to walk forward on the dream that had been left unfinished in his previous life. And then, Eftel said something that began to shake the logic of this entire era. It was true that he had no aptitude, but that did not mean he had no mana, and it definitely did not mean he could not use magic. To Eftel, the Magic Academy was not only a school, it was also the one place that might contain clues about why magic had become so strange after 400 years. And more importantly, it might help him understand how someone without aptitude could break past their own limits. Seeing that his stubborn younger brother would not give up, Fraser decided to set one condition. If Eftel could recreate even a part of the magic Fraser was about to cast, Fraser would personally write him a recommendation letter to enter the Magic Academy. After saying that, Fraser raised his hand seriously and began chanting. He called upon the wind spirit Sylphie. Then he released a sharp blade of wind that sliced through the base of a tree in front of them. For people of this era, that was probably a very solid display of magic, but in Eftel's eyes, its weakness was painfully obvious. The very act of chanting had already slowed down the casting speed far too much. When it was Eftel's turn, he did not even open his mouth to chant. He simply controlled his mana lightly. In the next instant, a massive pressure of wind erupted. It did not merely cut through the tree, it blasted the entire thing out of the ground. Fraser froze where he stood, because what Eftel had just used was not an ordinary technique. It was chantless casting, a method of using magic without reciting an incantation. In the current era, only sages who had trained for decades could even hope to reach that level. And yet, the child standing in front of him had done it as casually as brushing dust off his sleeve. Realizing that he had gone a little too far, Eftel quickly tried to cover it up. He claimed that he had accidentally used 4th tier magic, but that only shocked Fraser even more. By the standards of this era, 4th tier magic was already considered extremely advanced. To Eftel, however, 4th tier magic was only basic magic from 400 years ago. Then before he could properly stop himself, Eftel accidentally revealed that he could even use 10th tier magic. This time, Fraser's mind completely shut down. He fainted on the spot. The reason was easy to understand. In the current era, 10th tier magic had already been classified as a lost technique. It almost existed only in books and legends. While Fraser was unconscious, Eftel took the opportunity to check the books again, and the truth only made him more certain. The magical civilization of this world had declined severely. Spells that had once been considered low-level in his era were now treated as advanced magic. Chantless casting, which had once been a basic foundation for practical battle mages, had become a luxury that even sages needed decades of harsh training to achieve. Eftel understood that if he continued revealing his abilities so carelessly, people might begin to suspect the truth of his reincarnation, so he immediately chose to hide his real strength. When Fraser woke up, Eftel casually redirected the story. He said that Fraser's magic had been so powerful that the tree had flown back and hit him in the head, causing him to faint. It was a rough excuse, but under the circumstances, with Fraser still recovering from the shock, it somehow worked. After that incident, Eftel decided to temporarily follow the military path that everyone expected from him. As for his research into magic, he would continue that in secret. To put it simply, on the surface, he would study the field chosen by his family. But behind the scenes, he would quietly keep chasing his true passion. Even though Eftel had temporarily moved away from the Magic Academy, his competitive nature had not disappeared at all. Especially under the influence of the indomitable skill from his previous life, he began setting a new goal for himself. If he had to learn the sword, then he would become the strongest magic swordsman. In order to test Eftel's true ability, Fraser invited Mariah. Mariah was the former captain of the Knight Order of the Azure Kingdom. He was the kind of man whose presence alone could change the atmosphere. The moment the match began, Eftel immediately felt the difference. Mariah's killing intent, speed, experience, and pressure were all far beyond what any ordinary child could endure. Forced into a difficult position, Eftel had no choice but to use physical enhancement to keep up with his opponent's movements. At that moment, Fraser also explained something to Mariah. The terrifying part about Eftel was not the magic aptitude recognized by the system, it was how smoothly he could control the mana inside his body. The way he circulated mana was so fluid that it looked like the work of a seasoned warrior. But Eftel himself understood the truth very well. This was not some natural talent, it was the experience of a great sage who had spent an entire lifetime controlling mana. Even so, in pure swordsmanship, Eftel was still overwhelmed by Mariah. Mariah saw through his weaknesses very quickly. His body was still too small. He did not have enough height, his muscles lacked strength, and his technique was not yet polished enough to face Mariah seriously. If Eftel wanted to truly fight him, he would need at least 3 more years. But Eftel was not the kind of person who would accept defeat just because of physical disadvantages. In the moment he was pushed into a corner, he did not use magic. He also did not try to clash against Mariah's sword with brute strength. Instead, he suddenly used a physical technique from his previous life. He borrowed the force of his opponent and threw Mariah to the ground. It was a clean shoulder throw, so clean that even Mariah had to admit defeat in the test. Only then did Fraser reveal Mariah's true identity. He was not only the former captain of the Knight Order, he was also the headmaster of the Azure Kingdom Officer Academy. In other words, by making Mariah acknowledge him, Eftel had officially secured a place at the Officer Academy once he turned 15. Time continued to pass. Eftel was now 14 years old. Only 1 year remained before he would reach adulthood in this world. Although he was outwardly following the military path, he had never abandoned magic. On stormy days, Eftel quietly tested 10th tier lightning magic again. This was the very power that had once earned him the title of Thunder God Sovereign in his previous life. However, these experiments also helped him discover a new problem. When casting 9th tier and 10th tier magic, there was always a slight delay before the spell actually activated. For someone else, that might have seemed like a minor detail. But for Eftel, a mage who had once lived and died on the battlefield, that delay could become a fatal weakness. He also understood that without an attribute, deeper research into magic in this world would be extremely difficult. Because of that, Eftel's true plan had not changed. Once he turned 15, he would leave home and go to the Magic Academy by himself. Just then, Fraser brought him new information. Eftel's biological father had finally agreed to meet him. When Eftel's mother heard the news, she cried from emotion. She believed that all the years her son had spent working hard in military training had finally helped him gain recognition from the family. Eftel, however, understood very clearly that this meeting meant nothing to him. Even so, he decided to go along. He did not want to disappoint his mother and Fraser. At the Alcott mansion, the man known as Eftel's father appeared with a cold and merciless attitude. Duke Alcott had no intention of acknowledging him as his son. He even denied their father-son relationship outright. In his eyes, Eftel was nothing more than a disgrace to the family. A child who carried the blood of the Thunder God Sovereign, yet had no magic aptitude at all. Inside that very room, Eftel saw the portrait of the Thunder God Sovereign hanging on the wall, and the person in the portrait was none other than Eftel's own appearance from his previous life. The scene was almost painfully ironic. The entire family bowed their heads in worship before the image of the Thunder God Sovereign, but when the original Thunder God Sovereign stood right in front of them, they dismissed him as defective simply because his aptitude test showed nothing. The true purpose of the meeting was soon revealed. Duke Alcott had not called Eftel there to recognize him. He had called him there to announce that from that point onward, the family would cut off all financial support for Eftel and his mother. The reason he gave was simple. Eftel had already secured a special admission slot at the Officer Academy. The academy provided free food and lodging. From the 3rd year onward, it even paid a salary. Therefore, the family no longer needed to spend money on him. For Eftel's mother, who had barely survived on that small allowance, this was like a direct strike against her only lifeline. But for Eftel, the matter did not end there. Duke Alcott then called in another one of his sons, Joachim. He ordered Joachim to test Eftel's strength, using the excuse of making sure Eftel would not disgrace the family after entering the Officer Academy. The moment Joachim stepped forward, he did not even bother hiding his hostility. He called the test something no different from training a dog. His eyes and killing intent made it clear that this was not a simple examination. Eftel immediately understood. This meeting had never been about recognition, it had never been about family. From the very beginning, it had been a trap disguised as a test, and Joachim was the one brought out to crush him in front of the entire family. The duel at the Alcott mansion begins with Fraser's worried warning. He tells Eftal that Joachim was once a master swordsman with rare achievements back in his school days, and that if things look dangerous, Eftal should surrender immediately. But the problem is that the soul inside that 7-year-old boy is the Thunder God Emperor, who once stood against the Demon King, so this warning feels strangely reversed from the very beginning. Joachim has no idea who he is about to face. He throws Eftal a specially hardened wooden sword and threatens to break his bones and crush his skull. But what truly angers Eftal is not the sword. It is the insults aimed directly at Iria. Joachim calls her a pig and speaks crudely about how she was once favored. And in that moment, the Grand Sage's soul reaches its limit. Insulting a mother in front of her son is already dangerous, but doing it in front of a son who was once the Thunder God Emperor is basically choosing the fastest route to destruction. The moment Joachim charges forward, Eftal immediately activates physical enhancement. With terrifying speed, he closes the distance and calmly judges that Joachim's title as a master swordsman must have been nothing more than decoration, because his sword is slow and full of openings. With a single direct strike, Eftal breaks Joachim's wooden sword and sends him flying away, knocking him unconscious on the spot, right before the stunned eyes of Fraser, who had just finished warning his little brother to be careful. Eftal lowers his sword and stands before Joachim, who is lying on the ground like discarded trash, then coldly warns him that if he ever dares to insult his mother again, things will not end with a simple knockout. After that, he turns back and gently reassures Iria, as if nothing serious has happened. Before leaving, he even bows politely and thanks Duke Alcott for inviting them over, a scene where Eftal defeats his opponent while still keeping perfect manners, leaving the Duke trembling and sweating, barely managing to growl that Eftal must do his best at the Officer Academy to preserve what little dignity remains. 2 weeks after that shocking duel, life for Eftal and his mother unexpectedly returns to peace. During dinner with his favorite pie made by Iria, Eftal thinks that the Alcott family will surely try to take revenge after Joachim's humiliating defeat, but all of his predictions vanish when urgent knocking echoes through the evening. Iria opens the door and freezes at the sight before her. A strong mustached man is supporting Fraser into the house. Fraser is badly wounded and exhausted, yet he is still tightly holding a sleeping infant in his arms, weakly apologizing for startling them. The story quickly shifts to the royal palace of the Azure Kingdom, where the situation has become extremely dangerous. The Holy Knight Order and the Azure Army have taken nearly all elite forces on a grand expedition, leaving the royal guards protecting the capital so badly understaffed that even unfinished Officer Academy students have to be mobilized for guard duty. The house has been left wide open and the enemy seems to know it. At the same time, Fraser tells Mariah about shocking intelligence. The Grand Minister's faction is planning to use the expedition as an opportunity to assassinate the Crown Prince. But before they can even discuss a counterplan, a soldier rushes in and reports that the southern barbarians have invaded the royal capital. From the palace window, smoke and fire rise into the sky, and Fraser urgently calls for the prince to be taken somewhere safe. After safely bringing the newborn Crown Prince into the house, Fraser weakly reveals the whole political mess burning through the Azure Kingdom. The current king is actually the younger brother, far more talented than the elder brother who now serves as Grand Minister. But because the king has no heir, the throne would naturally pass to the Crown Prince, who is the legitimate son of that very Grand Minister. And the birth of this baby has turned the elder brother's faction into a nest of furious hornets, instantly triggering an assassination plot to seize power back. After hearing this, Eftal does not need any complicated reasoning. He immediately realizes that the person behind the attack is none other than his own father, Duke Alcott. Because on this board of power, the Duke is the one who would suffer most if the succession changes. The same man who normally treats his own son like worthless trash is now willing to burn an entire forest and kill a baby for political gain. Instead of returning to the royal capital sinking into chaos, Eftal decides to go with his brother and Mariah to escort the Crown Prince across the border to the main army's encampment, because that is the only place that can protect the baby from the Duke faction. Iria is so worried that she breaks into tears, but Eftal gently reassures her, while deep inside, the Thunder God Emperor from 400 years ago has already awakened. He says he has a duty to protect this country, just as he did in his previous life. Only this time, he does not need to wait for the Demon King to appear. But the journey through Neil Forest quickly turns into a death trap. The entire forest suddenly falls into an eerie silence, without birdsong or wind. Then from the darkness, soldiers from the Alcott family's mage corps reveal themselves and surround the whole group, and they do not stop there. They also set the forest on fire to cut off every escape route, as if they have already prepared the perfect stage for the heroes to die. When Fraser realizes that the group is trapped between fire behind them and the mage corps in front of them, he refuses to give up. He steps out from hiding alone to persuade his father, raising both hands to show that he is unarmed. Fraser begs Duke Alcott to stop everything and settle this through dialogue. But in response to his son's sincerity, the Duke shows no warmth at all. He coldly declares that Fraser is the very thing standing in his way, then orders his men to release their mana, striking Fraser with a bolt of lightning that makes him collapse unconscious on the spot. After witnessing that moment, Eftal no longer holds anything back. He steps forward with ice-cold eyes and says simply that he will show them what real magic is. In that instant, mana erupts violently from Eftal's body, shaking the very ground beneath him. He casts a spell that this era would never dare believe could exist, and in a single flash, the entire burning forest is frozen solid. The flames, the trees, and even the soldiers charging toward him are turned into massive statues of ice. The scale of his magic is so overwhelming that even Duke Alcott, watching from a distance, can only stare with his mouth open in terror, unable to understand how the child he abandoned for years could unleash power that far exceeds every standard of this world. As for Eftal, he stands calmly in the frozen forest as if he has only completed a warm-up exercise, and this is merely the opening act before he makes his birth father understand that the Thunder God Emperor, the legendary figure the Alcott family worships day and night, has actually been living under their own roof for the past 7 years. They were simply too obsessed with measuring talent through test tubes to notice. In the middle of the vast frozen lake he created, Eftal faces the entire Alcott Mage Corps with a cold expression, looking at them as if they are a group of troublesome students. He mocks them by saying that water magic is not even his specialty, but even so, none of them can scratch a single hair on his head. Hearing this, Duke Alcott turns red with fury and orders a full-scale attack. His pride has already been crushed, yet he still has no idea who he is standing against. The entire corps unleashes level 5 explosive arrows at once, and a massive blast swallows Eftal's position while the Duke watches with triumph in his eyes. But when the smoke clears, Eftal is still standing motionless like a stone statue surrounded by countless shining defensive magic circles. He has not even bothered to move, while the mages begin to stammer in disbelief because their strongest direct attack has done absolutely nothing to a boy who is not even of age. Driven mad by the disadvantage, Duke Alcott shouts and orders them to use the trump card he believes to be invincible, the level 6 focused Thunderburst, a spell with a grand name that shoots straight toward Eftal. But the only response is Eftal's tired sigh and his blunt criticism that this era gives its techniques impressive names while the spells themselves are ordinary. He casually raises his hand and forms a special level 7 magic shield, erasing the pathetic attack in an instant. The whole corps screams and calls him a monster. And in their eyes, he is even more terrifying than a monster because at least monsters usually have weaknesses. Eftal does not stop there. He draws his sword and charges straight into the enemy formation, using the very close combat techniques Frazier taught him to defeat mage after mage with ease when one of them desperately tries to cast the level 2 riot bomb. Eftal instantly closes in, shuts him down, and knocks him away like trash, while mocking them by saying their real combat ability is worse than the elementary students of his old era. A brutal statement, but completely accurate, because in the age of the Thunder God Emperor, level 2 magic was little more than a morning warm-up. Deciding to end the joke, Eftal summons a gigantic blue magic circle that covers the sky. The foolish mages assume that he is trying to control the weather or create static electricity like their minor tricks, but Eftal only smiles and declares with overwhelming force that what he controls is lightning. Then a level 10 pillar of thunder descends from the heavens, destroying the core formation in an instant, leaving nothing but ashes scattered across the ice. Duke Alcott and one surviving subordinate are only alive because Eftal deliberately held back and created a protective barrier around them. The Duke still stubbornly threatens him with the crime of resisting the national army, but Eftal coldly replies that this is a failed assassination attempt against the crown prince, and eliminating the mastermind is an act of protecting the country. He looks down on his own father, a man willing to kill his children for power, and officially ends the coup with a sentence of public hanging for both the Duke and Joachim, a fitting end for those who dared to target the crown prince and insult the mother of the Thunder God Emperor. After everything, Eftal meets Frazier again in town. His older brother has miraculously survived thanks to the family heirloom necklace, Oberon's Guardian, which blocked the fatal blow. The two brothers embrace with joy and relief that the other is safe, and thanks to Frazier's desperate efforts to save the crown prince, the Alcott family is not stripped of its title, while Frazier officially becomes the heir, a beautiful outcome for the rare older brother who chose justice inside a family filled with schemes. In a quiet forest, Eftal stands with Frazier and Mariah as he cleans up the battlefield using level 7 spells such as Evil Flame and Wild Wind. Only then do they truly realize the terrifying power he has been hiding all this time. Eftal apologizes, but of course he cannot reveal the truth about his reincarnation. Mariah understands and chooses to keep the secret, warning him never to use that power in front of outsiders in order to avoid throwing the world into chaos. But despite everything, Eftal remains firm in his single goal. He wants to enter the Magic Academy, continue his research, and reach the peak of magic that his previous life left unfinished. Mariah agrees to train his body and swordsmanship until he turns 15, while Eftal smiles brightly with hope, because at last, the path toward mastering magic in his new life has truly opened before him. Eftal has finally turned 15, the age when he is allowed to choose his own path. That morning, Iria struggles to remain composed as she prepares to send her son away from home. She tells him that he is now old enough to pursue the life he truly wants. But no matter how tired or discouraged he becomes, this house will always be waiting for him. Eftel embraces his mother and thanks her for raising him over the past 15 years. He asks everyone to take care of themselves, while Mariah tries to hide his tears by claiming that dust has blown into his eyes. Even in the middle of an emotional farewell, the old swordsman still reminds Eftel not to neglect his training. Eftel bows deeply to all three of them and begins his journey. Behind him stands the home where he grew up. Ahead lies a future shaped entirely by his own decisions. This time, Eftel is determined to overcome the limits of natural talent and reach the summit of magic that remained beyond him in his previous life. On the road toward the city, hosting the Magic Academy entrance examination, Eftel stops at a small camp to rest. The moment he sits down, he hears an argument at the neighboring table. An elderly mage in his 50s is kneeling before Edworth the Raging Flame, an A-rank adventurer invited to the nearby town. The old man teaches magic to local children and politely asks Edworth to spare a little time to guide them. Edworth cuts him off before he can finish. He proudly announces that he reached A-rank at only 20 years old, while the old man has spent more than half his life as nothing more than a C-rank mage. To Edworth, someone who has devoted his life to teaching rural children is not even worthy of speaking to him as an equal. A small amount of fame has already convinced him that everyone else exists beneath his feet. The old mage swallows his pride, apologizes, and invites him to the town's welcoming feast. Edworth becomes even more offended, claiming that his time is far too valuable for such people. He then pulls on the chain connected to the collar of a red-haired demon girl standing beside him. A slave mark created by Edworth is engraved upon her body, and he proudly declares that once the mark is complete, he will be able to force mana into it and command her to obey every order. He speaks as though cruelty were some magnificent achievement. The surrounding people clearly despise what they are seeing, but none of them dares challenge an A-rank adventurer. The sight reminds Eftel of Merlin, the demon girl he once rescued from a battlefield and raised as both a student and a member of his family. Had he ignored her cries beneath the ruins all those centuries ago, Merlin might also have been reduced to property and passed between cruel masters. The thought fills him with disgust. Even so, Eftel forces himself to remain patient. The slave mark has not fully stabilized, and destroying it carelessly could disrupt the magical structure and harm the person carrying it. At that moment, screams erupt outside. A gigantic orc charges into the camp, smashing merchandise and sending civilians running in every direction. No adventurer in the area appears strong enough to face it, so the elderly mage immediately introduces Edworth. The moment the crowd hears that he is A-rank, panic gives way to hope. Every terrified face turns toward him as though their savior has already arrived. The attention only feeds Edworth's arrogance. He declares that an ordinary giant orc is merely a B-rank monster, and therefore unworthy of serious effort from the famous Raging Flame. Before attacking, he even tells the villagers to watch carefully, since people from a remote place like this rarely receive the privilege of witnessing true magic. Edworth casts the 4th tier spell Divine Flame, covering the orc's entire body in fire. The crowd begins cheering, certain that the battle has already ended. Then the smoke clears. The monster is still standing, almost completely unharmed. Eftel immediately realizes that this is no ordinary giant orc. It is a berserk orc, the strongest known variant of its species, with defenses powerful enough to withstand 4th tier magic. Edworth reaches the same conclusion and understands that he cannot defeat it. Instead of protecting the civilians who place their trust in him, Edworth creates a barrier around the entire crowd, trapping them inside with the berserk orc. He remains safely outside and prepares to escape. With breathtaking shamelessness, he declares that someone as important as him cannot be allowed to die in an insignificant countryside camp. The villagers who praised him moments earlier will have to serve as bait while he runs. The people desperately strike the barrier, but none of them can break through. Behind them, the orc slowly turns in their direction. In a matter of seconds, the celebrated hero reveals himself as a coward, willing to exchange dozens of lives for a few extra moments of safety. Children scream, adults shield their families, and Edworth continues walking away as though every person behind him is worth less than a single step of his own. Eftel immediately casts the 6th tier spell Gospel of the Supreme Angel without chanting. The barrier shatters into countless fragments, freeing the civilians before the orc can attack. Edworth freezes in disbelief. A teenage boy has destroyed his magic in an instant, and Eftel has also used chantless casting, a technique that even the sages of this era may spend decades trying to master. Realizing that he has already attracted too much attention, Eftel searches for a way to defeat the orc without revealing anything more. His goal is to enter the examination as an ordinary applicant, not arrive in the city after becoming the subject of every rumor in the region. Eftel decides to fire the 3rd tier spell Flame Strike in public, while secretly layering a 9th tier spell beneath it. Everyone will believe the orc was defeated by ordinary 3rd tier magic, while the hidden spell performs the real work. Unfortunately, the plan never reaches its 2nd stage. The moment Flame Strike touches the berserk orc, the monster is completely incinerated. Edworth and the villagers stare in silence. Even Eftel is surprised. The spell he intended to use as camouflage has somehow completed the job of the 9th tier attack by itself. Edworth nearly falls over from shock. The elderly mage examines what happened and explains that although Eftal cast only a third-tier spell, the mana was compressed with extraordinary precision, and the magical structure contained almost no imperfections. Its actual destructive power was therefore comparable to a fifth-tier spell. Only then does Eftal fully understand how severely magical control has declined during the past 400 years. A technique considered basic in his former era is now enough to astonish everyone present. He suspects that even first-tier magic might have defeated the orc if used properly. Still hoping to avoid attention, Eftal claims that he merely got lucky and struck a weak point. It is a modest explanation, but not a particularly convincing one, after everyone just watched him destroy an A-rank adventurer's barrier and eliminate a powerful monster with one attack. Before leaving, Eftal turns toward Edworth and orders him to learn some basic respect. He points out that the elderly C-rank mage understands magic far better than Edworth does. More importantly, trapping civilians with a monster and using them as bait constitutes attempted murder. The fact that Eftal prevented the deaths does not erase the crime. A man willing to sacrifice innocent people has no right to control the life of another person. Eftal commands Edworth to release the demon girl and surrender himself to the authorities. His A-rank title can no longer protect his pride. One cold look from Eftal is enough to make the man who mocked everyone around him lower his head and obey. Edworth no longer possesses the courage to resist and agrees to every demand. For the first time, a trace of hope appears in the red-haired girl's eyes. Once Eftal confirms that the civilians are safe, he resumes his journey toward the city. However, even after traveling a considerable distance, he realizes that the demon girl is quietly following him. Whether he increases his speed or changes direction, her red hair remains visible somewhere behind him. She keeps enough distance to avoid disturbing him, yet never allows him to disappear completely, as though she is terrified of being abandoned but equally afraid of approaching. Eftal finally turns around and asks how long she intends to follow him. The girl immediately drops to her knees and begs him to become her new master. Eftal is left speechless. He has just freed her from one chain, and now she is voluntarily asking to enter another. Through tears, she explains that the slave mark has not completely disappeared. If she continues wandering alone, another cruel person could establish a new contract and force her to obey. Attempting to resist such a contract might even kill her. From her perspective, choosing someone powerful and trustworthy is safer than waiting for another monster like Edworth to claim her. When Eftal asks about her identity, she explains that her ancestors were defeated in an ancient war against humanity. Their entire family was enslaved, and that status continued across generation after generation. She is a descendant of demon royalty and a distant relative of Merlin, one of the greatest mages in the demon realm. The name Merlin brings memories from 400 years earlier rushing back. Eftal remembers the young girl he once adopted, the student who constantly begged him to teach her advanced magic and recklessly entered a forbidden forest because she wanted to become stronger as quickly as possible. He never expected that Merlin would still be alive, much less that she had risen to become the foremost mage of the demon race. The girl kneeling before him is a relative of the student he once considered family. With the slave mark still present, Eftal cannot simply leave her behind. Eftal agrees to become her master temporarily in order to protect her. However, he makes it clear that they will help one another as equals rather than continue the abusive relationship she endured before. The girl introduces herself as Anastasia and begins traveling with him. Unfortunately, she continues calling Eftal master and behaves with absolute obedience. Magical chains can be destroyed in an instant, but habits carved into the mind through years of suffering cannot disappear after a single conversation. Before nightfall, Eftal and Anastasia reach the city where the Magic Academy entrance examination will soon take place. Anastasia is surprised that someone as powerful as Eftal still intends to take the same examination as ordinary applicants. Eftal offers no detailed explanation and instead searches for a place where they can eat and prepare for the following day. He eventually leads her into an expensive restaurant catering to wealthy customers. The moment they reach the table, Anastasia ignores the empty chair across from Eftal and kneels obediently at his feet. She lowers her head and trembles like someone attempting to become the perfect slave. Eftal immediately becomes uncomfortable and tells her to sit in the chair. Anastasia responds in terror that a slave must remain beneath her master and would never dare share the same table. Realizing that ordinary persuasion will not work, Eftal uses the one form of authority she currently understands. As her temporary master, he orders her to sit in the chair and enjoy the meal with him. Their progress is interrupted when an employee announces that slaves are forbidden from sitting at the tables and that the restaurant serves only members of the upper class. He also doubts that Eftal can afford the meal. Anastasia immediately apologizes and offers to eat at a street stall instead, revealing how accustomed she has become to accepting discrimination without resistance. Eftel refuses to back down. He places a valuable magic stone worth more than 500 gold coins on the table. The employee's attitude changes instantly. The man who was prepared to throw them outside now bows repeatedly, apologizes, and prepares the finest private section in the restaurant. Apparently, Wealth can perform a transformation spell faster than any mage. Eftel refuses the change and orders the finest meat available, while insisting that Anastasia continue eating beside him. Faced with a table covered in expensive dishes, she struggles to believe that someone considered a slave is even permitted to touch the food. Eftel tells her to treat the meal as a proper introduction between traveling companions, yet he is trying to change more than a body accustomed to hunger. He wants Anastasia to understand that she has the right to sit at the same table, choose what she eats, and be treated as a human being. She has lived under someone else's control for so long that she has almost forgotten how to express anger or personal preference. When Eftel asks whether there is anything she dislikes, Anastasia cannot even understand why her master would care about her feelings. Eftel seriously tells Anastasia that from now on, she must speak honestly whenever something makes her uncomfortable. Gathering every fragment of courage she possesses, she attempts to refuse him with a voice barely louder than a whisper. The moment the word leaves her mouth, she panics, drops her head, and repeatedly apologizes for disobeying. Her fear of punishment has become almost instinctive. Watching the painful yet strangely awkward scene, Eftel understands that years of conditioning cannot be erased overnight. Removing the chains inside her mind may be far more difficult than destroying the mark on her body. He decides that he will help her change gradually, one small step at a time. The next morning, Eftel buys Anastasia a new set of clothes and brings her to the Magic Academy. The bright outfit makes her look completely different from the frightened slave he met the previous day. A long line of applicants from across the region waits outside the academy gates. Anastasia assumes that she is merely accompanying Eftel, so she is stunned when he tells her to enter the examination as well. He explains that anyone has the right to apply. If she passes, learns a profession, and develops her abilities, she may eventually support herself instead of remaining dependent on another person for the rest of her life. Eftel assures her that her magical potential exceeds that of most applicants standing outside the academy. His judgment is based partly on her connection to Merlin's bloodline and partly on the enormous mana he can sense directly within her. He has not brought Anastasia to the examination because he wants a more capable servant. He is offering her the first step toward independence, allowing her to build a future of her own and finally escape the identity that has imprisoned her family for generations. The first trial at Krone Academy of Magic is announced as a survival battle. 16 applicants enter the arena in each round, and they are permitted to use magic, weapons, and virtually any method necessary. Anyone knocked off the platform is immediately eliminated, and the match continues until only 5 competitors remain. The supervisor is a B-rank adventurer who seems delighted that he can earn money simply by standing there and watching. In previous years, none of the applicants were impressive enough to hold his attention. When several candidates surround Eftel, he assumes the weakest-looking person in a chaotic battle will naturally become the first target. The prediction has barely left his mouth when the supposed prey attacks first. Eftel reinforces his legs with magic and bursts through the circle. Every kick launches another opponent out of the arena. Within moments, the surrounding candidates are lying outside the platform, while Eftel remains standing calmly in the center. The examiner quickly realizes that the situation has completely reversed. In a survival match, the person displaying the greatest strength soon becomes the common enemy. The 5 remaining applicants therefore join forces against Eftel and Anastasia. Before they can close the distance, Anastasia forms a magic circle, calls upon the wind spirits, and casts the 3rd-tier spell, Wind Spirit's Kiss. A violent pillar of air erupts across the arena, catches all 5 attackers, and throws them outside simultaneously. When the wind finally fades, only Eftel and Anastasia remain on the platform. The applicants waiting for their turns immediately realize that Anastasia's abilities are far beyond those of an ordinary candidate. The examiner struggles to hide his shock before calling forward the next group of 16. Anastasia shyly admits that she may have used slightly too much power. Eftel does not criticize her and instead confirms that she possesses exceptionally rare magical talent. What truly concerns him is that Anastasia had to recite such a long incantation before activating the spell. He asks whether chanting is actually considered mandatory in the modern era. The examiner and everyone nearby burst into laughter, assuming Eftel is so ignorant that he does not understand the most basic principle of magic. Anastasia explains that spells obviously require incantations. To someone who lived during the golden age of magic, however, the strange part is expecting an enemy to stand still while a mage recites an entire speech in the middle of battle. Rather than continue arguing, Eftel raises one hand to demonstrate. 4 green magic circles appear around him at the same time. 4 4th-tier spells activate without a single spoken word. Enormous columns of wind tear through the arena, throwing everyone nearby aside and carving deep holes into the floor. The The platform and surrounding walls suffer severe damage. Eftal only intended to demonstrate chantless casting and did not deliberately target anyone, but the resulting destruction will require days of repairs. Anastasia can only stare, while the examiner immediately announces that both of them have passed the first round. Allowing these two to continue fighting would probably bankrupt the school. The next challenge is a written examination held inside a massive lecture hall. Having spent his entire previous life researching magical theory, Eftal finds the material extremely simple. His only complaint is the unbelievable number of questions. Even so, he continues working from the beginning of the paper until the proctor announces that time has expired. By then, Eftal has answered everything. He complains that the exam was absurdly long, leaving Anastasia horrified. She asks whether he truly attempted every question. Only then does she explain that the examination uses a selective format. Each applicant is supposed to answer only the sections related to their own specialty. Eftal's misunderstanding produces a result that shocks the entire academy. Inside the faculty council room, the instructors stare at the score of 958, unable to believe their eyes. Since Krone Academy was founded, no candidate has ever achieved a result so high. The new record belongs to Eftal Alcott, a name identical to that of the legendary Thunder God Emperor, one of the 4 emperors. The academy's director initially suspects that Eftal cheated. At that moment, the B-rank examiner enters and reports what occurred in the arena. A 4th-tier spell alone normally represents graduate-level ability, yet Eftal activated 4 of them simultaneously without chanting. Even the academy's own instructors may not be capable of reproducing such a feat. His testimony transforms the score of 958 from suspicious evidence into proof of an existence far beyond the school's standards. Combined with the name Eftal Alcott, the director is reminded of the Thunder God Emperor and begins wondering whether the legendary mage has somehow reincarnated. On the day the results are announced, Eftal and Anastasia separate to search for their examination numbers among the crowd. Anastasia quickly finds number 588 on the special admission list. Overwhelmed with happiness, she throws her arms around Eftal in front of the entire academy. After noticing everyone staring, she turns bright red, steps away, and hurriedly apologizes. Eftal simply smiles, congratulates her, and reminds her that from this day forward, she can finally live as an ordinary student. Their happiness quickly gives way to concern when neither of them can find Eftal's number, 589, on the main board. Both his theoretical and practical results far exceeded the requirements. Eftal briefly wonders whether the academy secretly examined his magical aptitude and rejected him because of his colorless attribute. Anastasia insists that her master could never fail and prepares to file an immediate complaint. Eftal stops her, knowing that creating a scene in front of the crowd will only make the situation more uncomfortable. Fortunately, Anastasia soon notices a framed announcement displayed separately nearby. Eftal did not fail at all. His number was removed from the ordinary list because he had been admitted through an exceptional special position. He has also been appointed the chief representative of all specially admitted students. Anastasia believes the role is perfectly appropriate for someone with his results. Eftal has barely finished feeling relieved before realizing that his plan for a peaceful school life has ended before classes have even begun. The benefits are certainly generous. His tuition, dormitory, and meals are completely covered, and he will receive a salary along with additional allowances. In exchange, however, Eftal must represent Krone during public events and exchanges with other academies. That responsibility directly contradicts his goal of quietly using the library to research the limits of magical compatibility. Since the appointment has already been publicly announced, refusing it will be extremely difficult. A greater problem appears in the hallway. As Eftal passes a white-haired demon woman, he immediately recognizes Merlin, the young student who once learned magic under him and has now grown into an adult. Her appearance has changed very little from his memories. Although Eftal's current body is younger, it still carries several features resembling his previous life. He fears that Merlin may recognize the teacher who supposedly died 400 years ago. If his reincarnation is exposed on the very first day, he will immediately become trapped in endless complications. Eftal calls Anastasia and suggests exploring another part of the academy. In reality, he is conducting a quiet retreat before his former student can look directly at him. Merlin's instincts remain as sharp as ever. The moment she senses something familiar, she suddenly calls out, "Master," and begins chasing him. Merlin does not directly claim that he is the Thunder God Emperor. She only asks whether Eftal has some connection to the legendary mage. Unwilling to create a public disturbance that might threaten his enrollment, Eftal pretends not to understand. He abruptly changes the subject, tells Anastasia that he is hungry, and pulls her away for lunch. Merlin continues calling for him to stop, but Eftal refuses to turn around. At the moment, a clumsy excuse is still safer than explaining an entire life from 4 centuries ago. While they eat inside the academy grounds, Eftal asks why Anastasia failed to recognize the white-haired woman. She is shocked to learn that the woman was Merlin and admits that they have never met personally. Merlin is the daughter of the current Demon King, while an ancestor 10 generations removed from Anastasia once held the same position. Their connection is so distant that they are little more than names on the same family tree. Eftal is more puzzled by Merlin's presence at Krone. She currently serves as headmistress of Altina Academy of Magic, so there should be no reason for her to appear here. The answer is revealed during the entrance ceremony. The host introduces Merlin as an honored guest, and she steps onto the stage to congratulate the new students as they begin their pursuit of magic. Once Eftel confirms that she is not a teacher at Krone, he temporarily relaxes and plans to address her suspicions discreetly after the ceremony. Unfortunately, the host suddenly calls the chief representative of the incoming students to deliver a speech and loudly announces the name Eftel Alcott. Whispers immediately spread through the hall about the name shared with one of the 4 emperors and the unprecedented theoretical examination record. Eftel's plan to avoid attention collapses completely. He is forced to walk onto the stage beneath Merlin's direct gaze. After the ceremony, his status as the exceptional student representative continues attracting attention. A group of female students quickly surrounds him and begins introducing themselves, while Anastasia sits nearby with obvious irritation because she was the first person to follow Eftel. The crowd voluntarily disperses when Merlin approaches. She places his examination paper in front of him and unexpectedly asks whether he knows what reincarnation means. The question strikes directly at his secret, but Eftel continues pretending not to understand while studying her intentions. Merlin explains that most of Krone's instructors know his answers are correct. The problem is that none of them understand the methods used to reach those answers. Every solution on Eftel's paper is based on the magical theory system of 400 years ago. To him, it is basic knowledge. In the modern era, however, most of it has been lost. Those traces remind Merlin of her former teacher. She admits that reincarnation sounds unbelievable, yet she is certain the current Eftel has a special connection to the Thunder God Emperor. Merlin also suspects that he avoided her because the connection involves a secret he refuses to reveal. Each of her arguments moves closer to the truth. Eftel desperately wants to admit that he is the teacher she once knew, but countless students are still listening nearby. If news spreads that the Thunder God Emperor has returned, the peaceful research life he desires will disappear forever. Realizing that complete denial cannot explain the ancient knowledge in his examination, Eftel leans closer to Merlin and invents another story. He claims that the Thunder God Emperor once had a secret lover and that they produced a child with exceptional magical talent. The child secretly inherited all of his knowledge before withdrawing into the mountains with future descendants to avoid the world's attention. Merlin immediately objects that her master never mentioned any hidden family. Eftel strengthens the lie with a piece of truth. He asks whether she knows that the Thunder God Emperor possessed no natural magical aptitude and carried that regret throughout his life. The information could damage the reputation of one of the 4 emperors, so very few people ever learned it. Even Merlin must admit that secrets of that importance are often concealed. Eftel then introduces himself as the 13th generation heir of this isolated bloodline, which supposedly never interacted with wider society. The explanation accounts for his knowledge of 400-year-old theory while allowing him to avoid revealing his reincarnation. Internally, Eftel apologizes to his former student for inventing an entire family tree directly in front of her. Merlin does not expose the story, although whether she truly believes him or has merely agreed to protect his secret remains uncertain. Merlin then seriously declares that the imaginary family Eftel described is not the only one continuing the path of the Thunder God Emperor. She herself has never stopped training throughout the past 400 years. Brief memories reveal Merlin fighting, studying, and teaching magic to generation after generation, preserving the path her teacher once opened almost entirely by herself. At that moment, the reunion becomes more than a threat to Eftel's identity. Looking at the student who remains young in his memories, he realizes he missed every part of her 4-century journey. The curiosity of a magician and the concern of an old teacher gradually overpower his desire to avoid her. Eftel genuinely wants to witness how far Merlin has advanced during those centuries. Merlin mentions a mock battle scheduled for that afternoon and asks whether he plans to participate. She then directly invites him to face her in a magical duel. Eftel understands that refusing would help reduce attention and preserve his quiet school life. Accepting a challenge from Altena's headmistress, however, will undoubtedly cause the entire academy to focus on him. After a brief moment of consideration, Eftel accepts the challenge. His desire to test the results of Merlin's 400 years of training has become more important than concealing his strength. Standing behind him, Anastasia quietly smiles at his decision. News that Eftel, the representative of the new students, would face Merlin quickly spread throughout Krone Academy. These mock battles were normally meant to show beginners how far they still stood from experienced mages. This year, however, the opponent was the headmistress of Altena herself, a legendary demon warrior who had remained at the summit of magic for centuries. The stands were almost completely full. Most spectators expected Merlin to control the match without difficulty, while others wondered whether the student who had shattered the entrance examination record might produce another surprise. The announcer introduced Eftel Eftal as the specially admitted student representative, and declared that Merlin would demonstrate the highest level of magic before the entire academy. Cheers immediately erupted. Several female students shouted Eftal's name, causing Anastasia to blush and cover her ears. Eftal paid no attention to them. His gaze remained fixed on the white-haired woman across the arena. To everyone else, Merlin was an unreachable archmage. In Eftal's memories, she was still the impatient child who constantly begged to learn advanced spells and once entered a forbidden forest because she wanted to become stronger as quickly as possible. 400 years had made her expression calmer, but the desire to improve inside her eyes had never changed. They agreed to begin with an opening exchange. Eftal attacked first. Without chanting, he instantly launched the 6th-tier explosive fireball toward Merlin. The fireball detonated violently and swallowed the entire area where she stood, causing the audience to hold its breath. Merlin had not taken the attack directly. The moment the flames reached her, she deployed the 7th-tier Perfect Fortress. Several layers of blue magical barriers stopped all the heat before it could touch her body. Eftal approved of her reaction, while Merlin realized that she could not treat him like an ordinary student. A teenager capable of casting 6th-tier magic without an incantation was clearly abnormal. Their first exchange forced her to admit that she had underestimated him. It also made her more willing to believe the story Eftal had previously told, that he was the 13th successor of a secret lineage entrusted with the Thunder God Emperor's knowledge. Even so, Merlin still possessed the pride of a direct disciple. Eftal might have inherited that knowledge through a hidden bloodline, but she was the person who had personally studied beneath the original Thunder God Emperor. She responded with the same 6th-tier explosive fireball. Eftal created a perfect fortress identical to the barrier she had just used, stopping the flames. Merlin did not wait for the fire to disappear. While Eftal's barrier was still enduring the pressure of her first attack, she completed another 6th-tier spell behind it. This was the Thunder God Emperor School's advanced technique of chaining high-level magic. The stronger a spell was, the longer its magical structure normally took to rebuild. A skilled mage, however, could begin constructing the next spell while the previous one was still active, allowing them to release powerful magic continuously without chanting or exposing a major opening. Merlin proudly explained the principle she had refined over several centuries, unaware that the man behind the barrier was its original creator. Eftal felt no irritation while watching his student use his own teachings to seize the initiative. Instead, he was delighted that Merlin had transformed that knowledge into pure battle instinct. He calmly informed her that his own reconstruction time had also ended, then counterattacked with the 7th-tier Wicked Frost. Freezing air erupted across the arena, sealing the flames surrounding his barrier and transforming the sea of fire into a massive block of ice. Eftal immediately followed with the 7th-tier Giant Ice. An enormous frozen spear formed from the magic circle and shot directly toward Merlin. Merlin realized that Eftal had predicted she would continue using fire and prepared ice magic to counter it. The speed with which he shifted from defense to offense surprised even her. Eftal increased the pace further, testing how well his former student could keep up. Merlin raised a 7th-tier Perfect Fortress to block Giant Ice. The collision between two spells of the same rank shook the arena. She believed the refinement of her barrier was equal to Eftal's, yet the enormous spear continued pushing forward. Merlin was forced to maintain the defense with both hands, and sweat began appearing on her face. Eftal calmly pointed out that her defensive structure still contained weaknesses. Nearly equal refinement did not mean that the spell was truly flawless. As long as those imperfections remained, Perfect Fortress could not completely stop Giant Ice. The way he identified every weakness with absolute precision felt painfully familiar. It was exactly how her teacher had corrected her 400 years earlier. Memories returned of the Thunder God Emperor sternly telling her that her magical structures were still immature. Now that same feeling of being completely understood had returned before a young man who shared Eftal's name. Merlin immediately changed tactics and deployed two 7th-tier Perfect Fortresses simultaneously. Controlling multiple spells would normally consume most of a mage's concentration and create an opportunity for an enemy to attack. Merlin deliberately used that weakness as bait. She waited for Eftal to approach, then launched a hidden counterattack from behind him. The explosion made the audience believe that Eftal had been hit. When the smoke cleared, however, he was standing behind Merlin. Eftal had not waited to receive the attack before reacting. He had already read her intentions and prepared the 8th-tier teleportation spell in advance, causing Merlin's ambush to strike nothing but empty air. A tactic she had spent years perfecting was dismantled through the same principles her teacher once taught her. Rather than becoming angry, Merlin laughed with nostalgia. A man named Eftal, using Eftal's spells and fighting exactly like Eftal. Every clue was leading her toward an answer that should have been impossible. Merlin decided to reveal her strongest technique. She declared that if Eftal could withstand the next attack, she would openly admit defeat. the 8th-tier Hammer of the Thunder God activated, sending golden lightning down from above and forcing Eftal to evade close to the ground. He narrowly avoided the strike but immediately realized that this was not Merlin's true secret. A single, highly refined Hammer of the Thunder God would not be enough for her to call it the ultimate technique she had developed over 400 years. Magic circles then appeared around both of Merlin's hands and feet. She divided her consciousness to operate 4 8th-tier spells at the same time, maintaining the lightning assault, protecting her body, and lifting herself into the center of an enormous electrical network. An ordinary mage risked losing consciousness simply by controlling 2 spells in parallel, yet Merlin kept 4 8th-tier structures completely stable. Even during the golden age of magic, Eftal had never witnessed a technique like this. At that moment, he no longer saw Merlin as the little girl who needed his protection. He saw a mage who had created a path entirely her own. Images appeared in his mind: the child he once carried away from a battlefield, the student training beside her teacher, and the archmage who continued fighting and teaching new generations long after his death. Merlin had not merely preserved the Thunder God Emperor's legacy, she had developed it into a realm its creator had never imagined. Eftal's pride in her erased any desire to hide his strength or end the match casually. He declared that Merlin had always been the disciple who made him proudest. As her teacher, he would answer 400 years of effort with his full power. An enormous magic circle opened across Eftal's arm, while Merlin drove her 4 8th-tier spells to their limits. Golden lightning covered the sky, and the entire power of the Hammer of the Thunder God descended in one final strike. Eftal did not retreat. The Thunder God Emperor's 10th-tier lightning magic erupted as a colossal stream of blue electricity. The 2 powers collided above the arena, but the balance lasted only an instant. The 10th-tier lightning quickly consumed Merlin's entire golden network. Light covered the battlefield, the ground split apart, and the shockwave forced the students in the stands to shield themselves. Anastasia also crouched beneath the overwhelming sound and pressure. Surrounded by lightning, Merlin assembled every clue from the beginning of the battle. Eftal's ability to predict her actions, his perfect identification of her weaknesses, the chained casting technique, teleportation, the ancient magical system, and now the 10th-tier lightning spell once used only by her former master. The story about a 13th-generation successor could no longer conceal the truth. Eftal refused to let the 10th-tier spell destroy the arena. After overpowering Merlin, he used Dispel Magic while the spell was still in the air, dismantling its structure and returning the remaining electricity safely to the atmosphere. The lightning no longer threatened the people nearby. Merlin lost her flight and fell onto the shattered arena floor, although she remained conscious. Eftal stood unharmed on the opposite side. No official announcement was needed. The outcome was obvious. Merlin knelt among the deep cracks, breathing heavily after consuming an enormous amount of mana, but victory no longer mattered to her. She looked directly at Eftal and asked whether he was the reincarnated Thunder God Emperor. No ordinary student could read a battle almost perfectly, use a magical system from 400 years ago, and dispel a 10th-tier spell in midair. Eftal hesitated. He had invented an entire secret family history specifically to avoid this moment, but Merlin had assembled every clue herself. Another lie would only damage the trust between teacher and student. Eftal finally admitted that no other explanation remained, and that Merlin understood the truth better than anyone. His answer confirmed that the young man before her was Eftal, the Thunder God Emperor who had died 400 years earlier and returned in a new body. The violent atmosphere immediately disappeared. Eftal approached Merlin and spoke with the voice of the teacher she remembered. He praised her final technique and admitted that it had genuinely surprised him. He acknowledged that she had never neglected her training during all 400 years they had been apart, then placed his hand on her head exactly as he had when she was a child. Merlin laughed and cried at the same time. Hearing those words of approval was enough to make 4 centuries of effort feel worthwhile. Eftal told her not to cry like a little girl. Merlin replied that even if she had become an archmage and the headmistress of Altina, she would always be the same child whenever she stood before her teacher. Their reunion in the ruined arena was interrupted when Anastasia ran over and called Eftal her master. The way she bowed, combined with the slave collar around her neck, immediately caused Merlin to misunderstand the situation. From her perspective, her newly reincarnated teacher had entered school while openly keeping a demon slave. Eftal hurriedly explained that he had never oppressed Anastasia. She had suffered under unusual circumstances, and he was currently protecting and caring for her. Anastasia politely greeted Merlin, who temporarily accepted that there was clearly more to the relationship than could be explained in the middle of the arena. Anastasia then warned them that a crowd was approaching. Students and spectators poured down from the stands. Some begged Eftal to teach them magic, while others wanted the newly admitted student to become an instructor. They did not know that he was the reincarnated Thunder God Emperor, but the power he had displayed was enough to shake the entire academy. Eftal insisted that he only wanted to live as an ordinary student and use the library for research. Merlin immediately dragged him away away from the arena, with Anastasia running after them and the excited crowd gathering around the devastated battlefield. The three traveled far from Crony, crossing mountain roads and a vast forest before arriving at a large mansion isolated within nature. The moment Eftal saw the building, he recognized it as the home where he had lived during his previous life. Every step, wall, and section of the courtyard brought back distant memories. What affected him most was that after 400 years, the mansion had been carefully preserved. Merlin inherited the estate and protected every trace left by her deceased teacher, as though she had refused to allow time to erase the life they once shared. Merlin told Eftel to rest there while she completed several official procedures. On paper, she would adopt him as her son. That identity would allow Eftal to use the Academy's facilities freely under the protection of its headmistress. Eftal did not know how to respond. 400 years after their reunion, the little student he once raised was now preparing to become her teacher's legal adoptive mother. Merlin's actual plan was even larger. She would use her authority to enroll both Eftel and Anastasia at Altina Magic Academy. Eftel could continue living as a student, gain access to the library and research facilities, and no longer need to hide his secret from the person leading the academy. Anastasia could also continue developing into an independent mage instead of remaining behind as a servant. Merlin enthusiastically imagined attending school with her teacher, eating lunch together, and conducting research every day. She even wanted to prepare a new uniform for him. Beneath that excitement was her desire to recover some part of the 400 years they had lost. The more Eftel considered the plan, the more he realized that Altina was the best possible choice. It possessed the research environment he needed, Merlin had enough authority to protect his secret, and he could continue pursuing magic while living as a student. Eftel finally agreed to let her handle the procedures. Merlin happily embraced the teacher who had returned to her, while Anastasia watched them with a smile. The adoption and enrollment had not yet been completed, but their journey had already entered a new stage. Eftal and Anastasia would travel to Altina under Merlin's protection, while the mansion preserved for 4 centuries would become the beginning of their new life together. After deciding to transfer to Altina Academy of Magic under Merlin's protection, Eftel suddenly remembers that Thunder Iron, the sword he owned 400 years ago, is still stored inside the old mansion. He therefore takes Anastasia down to the treasury to reclaim it. She worries that the Guardian may not know they are authorized to enter, but Eftal calmly replies that he is merely retrieving his own property. They have barely entered the passage when an enormous red-skinned guardian blocks the entire path. Mistaking Eftal and Anastasia for children attempting to break in and steal something, he declares that no one may proceed beyond this point and orders them to turn back before they receive a painful lesson. Eftal casually says that he came because there is something inside he wants. The Guardian loudly explains that Thunder Iron is a legendary SSS rank sword, supposedly brought back from the Demon King's castle by Eftal of the 4 Emperors. It is so valuable that an ordinary mage does not even possess the right to touch it. Eftal remembers the weapon very clearly. Thunder Iron once cut straight through one of his own level 10 spells, so its power fully deserves its reputation. The Red Guardian insists that only Merlin and Eftal of the 4 Emperors are permitted to enter. He refuses to believe that the child before him has any right to claim the sword. He then repeatedly refers to Merlin as an old woman and brings up rumors that her master possessed no natural magical talent, suggesting that he may even have used dishonest methods to earn his place among the 4 Emperors. Eftal has no interest in the insults and simply asks the Guardian where his sword is. The Red Giant points toward it and challenges him to take it if he can. Every treasure in the chamber is protected by defensive magic, and breaking those spells should require ability comparable to Merlin's. Eftal walks to the weapon rack and silently casts the level 8 spell Complete Dispel. The protective barrier vanishes immediately, and he calmly draws Thunder Iron while the Guardian watches in stunned silence. At that exact moment, Merlin appears while radiating a frightening amount of magical power. She says that even from outside the mansion, she clearly heard someone calling her an old woman. The Guardian immediately panics and begins desperately making excuses. Eftal calmly explains that he remembered his sword was still stored there and came to retrieve it. Merlin is surprised to learn that her master studied swordsmanship during his new life as well. Eftal promises to teach her when an opportunity arises. After seeing Merlin's respect for Eftal, remembering the chantless level 8 spell he just used, and comparing all of it with the boy's manner and presence, the Guardian finally realizes that the person before him is the reincarnated Eftal of the 4 Emperors. He drops to his knees and begs forgiveness for his disrespect. Eftal does not punish him. He merely explains that he and Anastasia will be living in the mansion from now on, and orders the Guardian to remember them so this does not happen again. The Guardian hurriedly agrees and begs Eftal to save him from Merlin's anger. Eftal can only sigh and admit that there is nothing he can do. Merlin coldly warns that if the Guardian ever calls her an old woman again, she will erase him so completely that not even a fragment remains. The three then leave the treasury with Thunder Iron, abandoning the trembling Guardian to face the consequences of his own mouth. Merlin later takes Eftal and Anastasia to the shopping district to have their school uniforms made. As he walks through the familiar streets, Eftal is surprised to find that several stores remain in nearly the same locations and retain much of their old appearance after 400 years. At the tailor shop that once made curtains for Merlin's room, Anastasia blushes while her measurements are taken, while Eftal calmly reads a book and waits. Once the order is complete, a female employee tells them about a citywide treasure hunt. Participants may keep the items they find, and whoever collects the most will win. The grand prize is a trip to a hot spring resort. Merlin immediately becomes interested, and Anastasia thinks the event sounds entertaining. Eftal says only that he will consider it, having already realized that his student cares far more about the vacation than the treasure itself. Not long afterward, the three stand before the event notice. Merlin declares that they must enter and win first place. Eftal decides that occasional relaxation may not be a bad thing, and agrees. Anastasia, meanwhile, keeps staring at the golden figure pictured on the poster and blushing. She insists that she is not especially interested in the hot springs, but continues hiding the real reason for her reaction. According to the rules, every treasure is covered with concealment magic, and is therefore nearly impossible to locate with the naked eye. Anastasia suggests using Complete Dispel, just as Eftal did when retrieving Thunder Iron, but he rejects the idea immediately. The spell covers too wide an area. Casting it in the middle of the city could erase unrelated protective and operational magic, throwing the entire district into chaos. Eftal decides to interfere only with the concealment spells placed on the treasures by the organizers. He must identify the exact sections of magical structure that were altered and isolate them from the countless other spells operating throughout the city. He then casts the level 5 spell Magic Interference. Numerous blue magic circles appear, causing the hidden golden statues to glow and reveal their positions. Eftal quickly finds statues hidden inside a small house, within a storage area, high in a tree, and beneath a bridge. His spell only reveals the treasures, so he still has to travel to each location and collect them himself. However, once every hiding place has been exposed, the outcome is practically decided. Eftal moves continuously and gathers an overwhelming number before the other contestants even understand what is happening. Personally, allowing Eftal to participate is like asking a high school senior to compete in first grade arithmetic. The organizers may want to reconsider the balance of this event. The group wins the hot spring tickets. Merlin is delighted that her vacation plan succeeded, while Anastasia tightly embraces a golden statue of a smiling child. When Eftal asks why she likes it so much, she blushes and admits that the statue's smiling face resembles him. The object that caught her attention from the beginning was not the grand prize, but something that reminded her of the person who saved her. That evening at the mansion, Merlin finds Eftal drinking tea. She says that she recently bathed with Anastasia and wanted to inspect whether the girl was physically suitable to remain beside and care for someone as exalted as her master. The suggestive wording leaves Eftal speechless. He firmly insists that he and Anastasia do not have the kind of relationship Merlin is imagining. Merlin apologizes and finally moves to the real subject. While they were bathing, Merlin saw an unusual slave mark on Anastasia's body. Its structure is far more complicated and dangerous than an ordinary one. They do not yet know how it functions, what conditions activate it, or who may be capable of controlling it. Keeping someone with such a mark nearby is comparable to keeping a dormant time bomb. Merlin does not believe Anastasia intends to harm them. She fears that the danger sleeping within the spell may suddenly activate without warning. Eftal still intends to keep Anastasia beside him. He calmly states that the decision is his and will not change. He once rescued Merlin from a battlefield despite her demon blood, and he cannot now abandon Anastasia to loneliness merely because she may present a danger. Merlin recognizes that the Thunder God Emperor has already considered the risks and does not argue further, even though the threat posed by the mark remains unresolved. The following day, Eftal and Anastasia enter Altina Academy of Magic wearing their new uniforms. They immediately become the center of attention. The academy is attended almost entirely by demons, so a human walking among students with horns and pointed ears naturally stands out. Anastasia explains that everyone staring at him is normal, while Eftal simply does not care. As long as he can continue pursuing magic, he will accept any environment. His only wish is still to enjoy a peaceful life as an ordinary student. That dream begins collapsing the moment they enter the classroom. Many students are shocked that the transfer student is human, while several openly describe Eftal as a member of an inferior race. A silver-haired boy even complains about the unpleasant smell supposedly unique to humans. Anastasia clenches her hands in anger, but Eftal calmly tells her to sit down and refuses to respond to the insults. The silver-haired student assumes that Eftal must come from an influential family and used money or connections with the administration to enter through special treatment. Abe Portez also stands and demands to know how a human could possibly keep up with Altina's curriculum. He emphasizes that this is an elite academy with intense competition, attended by races possessing superior magical aptitude. In his eyes, Eftal has no right to be there. A blonde elf claims that she does not discriminate based on race and judges people only by ability. she immediately contradicts herself by declaring that her pride as an elite elf will not allow her to study beside a human incapable of using proper magic. She then orders Eftel not to attract attention, despite having judged him before seeing any of his actual abilities. These smug elitists have no idea that Eftel could put the entire group on the floor with a casual wave of his hand. Eftel considers their words and admits that demons and elves generally possess greater natural magical aptitude than humans. His talented older brother Fraser can use only level 2 magic, while Anastasia, who constantly describes herself as weak, can already cast level 3 spells. However, a common difference between races cannot determine the limits of every individual, nor does it give anyone the right to look down upon others. Eftel himself is the clearest proof. Despite possessing no magical aptitude at all, he once reached level 10 magic and became the Thunder God Emperor. Magic has declined greatly over 400 years, yet prejudice against humans appears almost unchanged. The confrontation ends temporarily when Merlin orders everyone to return to their seats. She unexpectedly announces that beginning today, she will personally serve as the class's homeroom teacher. The room immediately erupts because no one expected Altina's headmistress to teach an ordinary class herself. Abe assumes that Merlin came after hearing about his achievements and confidently introduces himself as the highest-ranked student. She flatly replies that no one asked him. Merlin points directly toward Eftel and confirms that she is present because today is his first day at the academy. Every eye in the classroom immediately turns toward the human boy, and Eftel's plan to remain unnoticed nearly dies on the spot. Abe cannot accept that a human is receiving more attention than he is, and continues insisting that Eftel must be the descendant of some powerful figure. His prejudice does not allow him to consider the possibility that Eftel may simply possess extraordinary ability. Merlin coldly responds that a mage who sees the world only through prejudice remains insignificant, regardless of his academic ranking. She orders the entire class to observe Eftel carefully because meeting him may give them the opportunity to destroy their misconceptions about humans. The students stare in disbelief. To them, Eftel appears to be nothing more than a human from a supposedly inferior race, making Merlin's declaration sound completely absurd. Afterward, Abe and two friends surround Eftel and demand to know who he is and why Merlin would appear personally merely because he enrolled. They rely entirely on unconfirmed rumors. They mention that Merlin once opened classes for human children and claim that she is especially attentive toward attractive young men. From those stories, Abe concludes that Eftel is merely a favorite being given special treatment for Merlin's amusement. Eftel does not argue in his own defense, although the middle-aged soul inside him is beginning to understand what schoolyard verbal abuse feels like. Merlin begins homeroom with a selection of representatives for an upcoming competition between classes. Most positions have already been decided, leaving only the role of magic swordsman. The position will significantly affect future evaluations, and students may either volunteer themselves or nominate someone else. The moment Eftel hears that the subject is a competition, he lowers himself against the desk and tries to disappear from everyone's attention. He does not want to participate because he knows that entering a contest could awaken the intensely competitive nature of his previous life. If that happens, his plan to conceal his power and live peacefully will certainly collapse. Abe Portes volunteers, and the class quickly supports him because his swordsmanship ranks among the best. The blonde elf also declares that the choice is already obvious. Eftel relaxes, believing someone else has taken the troublesome position, only for Merlin to ask whether anyone wishes to nominate another candidate. At that moment, Anastasia unexpectedly raises her hand. Eftel initially assumes that she wants to participate herself, but the red-haired girl becomes flustered. She nearly calls him her master in front of the entire class and hurriedly corrects herself. After gathering her courage, Anastasia formally nominates Lord Eftel for the position of magic swordsman. The classroom immediately erupts. Merlin is so delighted that she can barely conceal her smile. Abe stares at Eftel with intense pressure, while the newly nominated student can only freeze in disbelief. Anastasia has pulled him directly into the competition he spent the entire lesson trying to avoid. Anastasia's combination of cuteness and enthusiasm leaves the old soul inside Eftel 3 parts anxious and 7 parts helpless. To select the class's magic swordsman representative, the students decide to settle things with a duel, and magic is completely forbidden. On paper, it sounds like the reincarnated great mage will finally have to compete using ordinary human ability. The problem is that Eftel's definition of ordinary has never been particularly normal. The moment Abe draws his sword, he starts boasting and openly looks down on Eftel as an inferior human. Eftel does not get angry. If anything, he thinks Abe looks reasonably strong and quietly comes up with a perfect little script. He will throw out a light kick as bait, Abe will dodge, they will exchange sword strikes for a while, and then Eftel will choose the right moment to lose naturally without drawing attention. It is a good plan. Unfortunately, the other actor refuses to follow the script. The instant Eftel lifts his leg, Abe fails to dodge, takes the kick directly, and drops face first onto the ground. He does not even get the chance to swing his sword before Merlin declares Eftel the winner. The entire class instantly shifts from contempt to disbelief. Abe was supposed to be one of the strongest students there, yet Eftel dealt with him in a single move. Naturally, the students begin assembling their own explanation. They speculate that Merlin must be trying to reform the Academy's magic swordsman program. Humans may be weak in magic compared with other races, but they can excel in close combat, so perhaps Eftel is a special swordsman brought in to test a new training method. The fact that Merlin personally became their homeroom teacher is quickly dragged in as supporting evidence. The more they talk, the more convincing their theory sounds. Eftel realizes that correcting them would probably create even more trouble, so he simply lets the misunderstanding grow and nods along as though they have figured everything out. That evening at the mansion, Anastasia eats with Eftel and brings up the match from earlier. She praises him for defeating such a strong opponent so easily. Eftel casually replies that Abe turned out to be much weaker than he expected. Anastasia does not laugh. After hesitating for a while, she asks what he would do if one day he faced a situation that strength alone could not solve, perhaps even a tragic fate that seemed impossible to resist. Eftel thinks about it before answering that all he could do would be to keep trying, to work hard enough that he never allows himself to reach a point where nothing can be saved. Even if what stands before him truly resembles an impossible wall, he would still search for a way over it. After all, one of the reasons he exists in this era at all is to overcome the limits that once stopped him in his previous life. Hearing that only makes Anastasia feel even farther away from him. Deep down, she still thinks of herself as a slave. Ever since Eftel rescued her, she believes she has contributed almost nothing, and the more kindly he treats her, the more indebted she feels. Years of conditioning have taught her that repaying someone means offering absolute obedience in the way a slave is expected to. Eftel immediately stops her, makes it clear that he understands her gratitude, and tells her she does not need to repay him by continuing to live according to that old mindset. Simply sharing an ordinary meal at the same table with her makes him far happier than forcing her into another form of servitude. Anastasia stares at him, still unable to understand why something so simple could possibly be enough. Eftel does not lecture her further. He merely points out that the meat is getting cold. Anastasia quietly returns to the table, and when Eftel tastes the food and says it is good, she immediately brightens. It is an ordinary dinner, yet for Anastasia, that very normality is unfamiliar. What Eftel has been trying to give her was never a kinder master. It was the idea that she has the right to live as a person. Just as the atmosphere finally softens, Merlin and the Treasury Guardian discover that several valuable items have disappeared. Anastasia is also gone from the mansion. The Guardian admits that he allowed her through because he considered her someone familiar. Merlin immediately remembers the special slave mark hidden beneath Anastasia's old brand. The theft and her disappearance happening at the same time means the danger that once existed only as a possibility has now begun to reveal itself. Merlin explains to Eftel that ordinary slave contracts still have limits. A master cannot simply order a slave to commit crimes or take their life without restriction. The mark on Anastasia, however, is a forbidden formula capable of overriding those safeguards. Merlin asks what her teacher intends to do. Eftel gives a simple answer. He will break it. Merlin immediately warns him that this is not the kind of magic that can simply be erased. In the past, an entire small nation was devastated by a being worshipped as a god after people attempted to break a similar contract. The power guaranteeing the formula comes from a contracted beast revered as a divine entity. Freeing Anastasia may therefore mean confronting that being directly. If Eftel fails, even the nation he once protected could be dragged into the consequences. Merlin cannot understand why her teacher would take such an enormous risk for someone who has seemingly stolen their treasures and run away. Eftel, however, does not see the situation as simple betrayal. Long ago, he rescued Merlin from a battlefield even though she was a demon. His principle has not changed. Once he reaches out to save someone, he intends to take responsibility until the end. More importantly, Eftel does not believe Anastasia is the kind of person who could casually turn her back on him. That trust may sound emotional, but he is not relying on faith alone. He had already placed tracking magic on the most valuable treasures. He may rescue people based on trust, but apparently he still keeps proper security on expensive property. Thanks to those markers, Eftel knows exactly where Anastasia is carrying the stolen items and immediately sets out to bring her back. Meanwhile, Anastasia has arrived at another mansion. Before her stands a white-haired demon man, whom she bows to and addresses as master. He is extremely pleased with the treasures she has brought, including items belonging to both Merlin and Eftel. What catches his attention most is Thunder Iron, the legendary sword from 400 years ago. The moment he holds it, he recognizes that the weapon is far beyond an ordinary treasure. He then asks about Eftel, a human who only recently entered the academy, yet has already become powerful enough to attract the Portes family's attention. Anastasia can only admit that even she never expected Eftal to be this strong. What she cares about far more, however, is the promise that has burdened her family for generations, including the 3 relics her older sister obtained in the past. Anastasia's generation has now finally delivered all 5 required treasures. She cautiously asks whether that means her obligation is finished. The white-haired man confirms that the 5-item quota for this generation has indeed been completed. Then he immediately destroys the hope that had just appeared. Completing the quota and removing the special slave mark are entirely separate matters. The curse attached to the Bernova bloodline will not disappear. If Anastasia ever has children, the mark will continue into the next generation. He tells Anastasia to wait until morning while he speaks with his father about what to do with her. Only after returning to her room alone does the obedient expression finally collapse. Anastasia admits that every visit to this place after stealing an item or reporting a mission makes her feel sick. This time is worse than any before, because the person she betrayed is Eftal, the first person who pulled out a chair and invited her to sit beside him, bought her new clothes, brought her to the academy, and told her that she could decide her own future. Anastasia can only tell herself that this will be the last time, that once everything is over, she will finally be free. Then memories of her older sister begin returning. When Anastasia was young, she never understood why her sister acted so cold during the rare times she came home. The two would start arguing almost immediately. Her sister said cruel things and even claimed that life would have been easier if Anastasia had never been born into the family. Yet immediately afterward, she would quietly give the money she had earned to their father so the household could survive. Their father could only apologize for forcing his daughter to endure so much hardship. To young Anastasia, however, all she saw was an older sister who disappeared for months, returned wearing nice clothes, handed over some money, and then left again. She had no idea what those journeys truly involved, and she could not understand why her sister seemed determined to push her away. In childish anger, Anastasia once shouted that she hated her sister and never wanted her to come home again. Her sister only looked at her with sadness, gave her one final smile, and turned away. That expression remained trapped in Anastasia's memory because she could never understand it. Only after her sister returned one day unable to continue her mission and eventually died did the truth finally emerge. To the Portes family, her death was not treated as the loss of a human life. They merely saw an empty position in their treasure-gathering system that needed someone new to fill it. The person chosen as the replacement was Anastasia. Still too young to understand what was happening, Anastasia was taken to a ritual while struggling and begging for help against cold, indifferent orders. Only after the procedure was complete did they tell her that the special slave mark had been transferred to its next bearer. From that moment onward, Anastasia became the exclusive slave of the Portes family and inherited the obligation her sister left behind. Every generation of the Bernova family was required to surrender 5 treasures. The person carrying the mark would use their position as a slave to gain access to places containing magical artifacts and steal them for Portes. Anastasia's sister had carried that burden for years and ultimately lost her life before she could ever truly escape the chain. Only then did Anastasia finally understand why her sister had always acted so cruelly toward her. She knew the mission could kill her at any time, so she deliberately carried the responsibility herself and tried to force her younger sister away. Perhaps if Anastasia hated her enough, then when the worst finally happened, the pain would be easier to endure. It was a clumsy form of protection, cruelest of all toward the person doing the protecting, and Anastasia only recognized the love behind it after she had lost every chance to say thank you. All the angry words she had thrown at her sister became the things she most desperately wished she could take back. She could only cry and apologize to someone who could no longer hear her. For years afterward, Anastasia continued enduring the burden because she believed the Bernova curse originated from her ancestors' crimes. The history passed down to her claimed that around 400 years ago, Bernova started a war against Portes, murdered members of their own people, and eventually lost. Their descendants therefore carried the slave mark as punishment. Believing that story allowed Anastasia to force herself to accept the injustice. No matter how painful things became, she told herself it was a debt her family deserved to repay. Back in the present, however, the person standing before her is none other than Abe Portes, the same opponent Eftal knocked down with one kick that morning. Here, he is no longer merely an arrogant student. He is one of the people holding the chain that has controlled Anastasia's entire life. Abe tells her directly that as long as the slave mark exists, Anastasia has no right to choose her own future. Even though her generation has already delivered all 5 treasures, she must continue obeying Portes. Eventually, she will be expected to pass the mark on to the next generation, and only after someone else inherits that burden will her role be considered complete. The freedom Portes promised was never freedom at all. It merely meant forcing one generation to hand the same prison to the next. Anastasia immediately protests. Her sister sacrificed her entire life. Her family has suffered for generation after generation. If the curse simply continues forever, then what was any of that suffering supposed to accomplish? Abe finally reveals the cruelest truth of all. The history the Bernova family has been taught for 400 years is a lie. Portes was the side that originally started the war. After provoking the conflict and eventually winning, they placed the blame for killing their own people on Bernova, then turned that false accusation into the justification for forcing the entire rival bloodline into a hereditary slave contract. The victors did not merely rewrite history. They forced the descendants of the defeated family to repay a crime that had never belonged to them. Abe coldly adds that when Anastasia's sister learned the truth, she wore the same expression of despair Anastasia has now. Everything that allowed Anastasia to endure suddenly collapses. Her ancestors were not people who deserved to be cursed. Her sister did not die paying some legitimate debt. The entire Bernova family has been forced to bow for centuries because of a lie repeated from one generation to the next. Worse still, Anastasia has just betrayed the first person who genuinely wanted her to be free in order to complete an agreement that was never intended to release her at all. Abe calmly relies on the authority of the slave mark to force her back into the role Portes has assigned her. As long as the mark remains, he tells her, she can run anywhere she wants, but eventually she will always be forced back to the person called her master. Anastasia can only stand there, frozen beneath a truth that has destroyed the entire fate she once forced herself to accept. Meanwhile, Eftel is already following the tracking magic attached to the stolen treasures and heading straight toward the place where she is being held. Anastasia leaves the Portes estate with her mind almost completely blank. All 5 treasures have already been delivered. Her older sister died carrying the same hereditary obligation, yet freedom is still nothing more than a promise that was never meant to be fulfilled. Even worse, once every 6 months, the special slave mark will forcibly compel Anastasia to return to that bastard Abe. Just when she has reached her lowest point, a group of unfamiliar men blocks her path. They begin harassing her and even lift her skirt to inspect the mark. Noticing that something seems abnormal about the connection to her current master, they immediately start getting ideas. Normally, Anastasia would at least feel enough fear to retreat. This time, she simply closes her eyes and lets them do whatever they want. Whatever happens to her no longer seems to matter. Her spirit has given up so completely that even her body no longer wants to resist. This is no longer about whether she is frightened. She has been denied the right to choose for so long that she has stopped thinking of herself as someone worth protecting. Suddenly, the men collapse one after another. Eftal stands in the middle of the alley with a completely cold expression, and the crushing pressure coming from him is enough to make the entire group scramble away without looking back. He takes Anastasia somewhere quiet and asks her directly why she took the treasures without telling him. Anastasia immediately kneels and apologizes, but what frightens her most is not the possibility of being scolded. She simply believes that even if she explained everything, nothing would change. The slave mark was created through a power people call divine. It is not something one person can simply decide to erase. Eftal listens and asks only one question in return. So what if it is divine power? Then he tells Anastasia to look carefully at the person standing in front of her. This time, Eftel does not hide anything. The name Eftel Alcott was never a coincidence. He is the Thunder God Emperor from 400 years ago, reincarnated into his current body after death. Anastasia completely freezes. The new student she has been calling Master is actually one of the legendary 4 emperors. It sounds absurd, but after everything she has witnessed since meeting him, the impossible explanation begins to make far more sense than the ordinary one. A man supposedly born without magical aptitude casually uses high-level spells, wipes out monsters as though taking out trash, stands against Headmistress Merlin, and performs techniques that the current age treats as legends. Eftal's confession is outrageous, yet all the evidence has been sitting in front of Anastasia the entire time. He tells her not to use her own common sense to define his limits. If the man he used to be had obediently accepted the words, "That's impossible," then there would never have been a Thunder God Emperor for future generations to turn into legend. Eftal promises that he will see Anastasia's situation through to the end. He does not yet know exactly how to destroy the contract, nor does he know what supposed God stands behind it. But not knowing the solution is completely different from accepting that no solution exists. Hearing that, Anastasia finally breaks down crying. For the first time, she admits aloud that she truly cannot do this alone. Then, instead of apologizing or offering herself as payment, she directly asks Eftal to save her. Meanwhile, Abe is happily calculating the value of the treasures Anastasia delivered. The moment one of the swords is placed on the table, the appraiser recognizes its enormous historical value and initially offers 1,000 gold coins. Abe immediately pushes the price up to 5,000. After some consideration, the buyer accepts and says he will return another day because he did not bring enough money. Abe leaves looking completely delighted with himself. If one item alone is worth 5,000, then selling the rest should make him ridiculously rich. Right when he is imagining money pouring in, Anastasia willingly returns. She bows and asks him to give back Eftal's sword. That one item, at least, she insists on returning. Abe pauses. The slave who has always obeyed without question is suddenly asking for something back. Then he dismisses her demand completely. To House Portes, Anastasia is nothing more than a tool used to obtain treasures. Tools do not get to ask for the merchandise back. The previous night, Anastasia had already confessed to Eftal that she stole the treasures. Instead of blaming her, he asked a completely different question. Was that what she truly wanted to do? Anastasia answered no, but immediately added that slaves do not get to decide what they want. Eftal then reminded her of her older sister. She lived beneath the same pressure of the slave mark and was also forced to steal treasures. Yet even though the contract controlled her actions, her mind never completely belonged to House Portes. Her sister still chose to protect Anastasia. She still sent money home. She deliberately acted cold and pushed her little sister away because if one day she never returned, perhaps the child waiting at home would suffer less. Back then, Anastasia only saw a sister who constantly disappeared and acted cruel whenever she came home, so she hated her. Only after her sister died did Anastasia understand that those harsh words had been a painfully clumsy form of protection. Eftal makes the distinction clear. The slave mark may have forced her sister's actions, but the decision to protect Anastasia belonged entirely to her. House Portes never owned that part of her. Those words make Anastasia remember everything Eftal has done since rescuing her. Pulling out a chair so she could sit beside him, buying her new clothes, bringing her to the academy, patiently asking what she liked and disliked, and repeatedly making her practice saying no. Abe wanted a slave who knew how to lower her head. Eftal has been stubbornly teaching her how to raise it. And so the next morning, Anastasia returns to Abe once more and repeats the same demand. Give her Lord Eftal's sword back. Abe immediately grabs her by the throat and lifts her off the ground, demanding to know when a slave became bold enough to disobey her master. He viciously explains the future he has prepared for her. Anastasia will be forced to bear as many descendants as possible. Those children will inherit the mark and become tools for House Portes in turn. And once Anastasia herself is no longer useful, she will be discarded like an old object. This time, however, Anastasia does not retreat. She looks directly into his eyes and tells him that she will no longer obey House Portes. It is only one sentence, but for someone who has spent her entire life trapped inside a slave mentality, it may be the greatest act of rebellion she has ever made. Abe immediately realizes who changed her. He curses Eftal as an inferior human and knocks Anastasia onto the grass, trying to crush her resistance with violence. Yet even then, she refuses to submit. Abe draws his sword, stands over Anastasia, and declares that he will make her body remember who its real master is. He lowers the blade toward her face and says he will start by carving away that arrogant expression. Before the sword can descend, a hand catches it from above. Eftal has finally stepped in. Instead of scolding Anastasia, he praises her courage. As it turns out, the previous night Anastasia made one request of him. Do not interfere from the beginning. She caused this situation herself and she wanted to return, face Abe directly, and try to correct what she had done with her own hands. That is why Eftal did not remain hidden to test her loyalty or casually allow her to be beaten. He was respecting her decision until Abe crossed the line and prepared to inflict serious injury. Hearing the two of them speak only makes Abe angrier. He screams that Anastasia is his slave, calls Eftal an inferior human who dared enter Portis territory, and threatens to deal with both of them. Eftal answers with a single punch that sends Abe spinning through the air before planting him face first into the ground. Somehow, even after crawling back up with his face twisted from the impact, Abe still has enough confidence left to keep boasting. This is Portes territory, he says, and there are 300 elite guards behind him. The entire estate soon fills with armed men. Abe orders everyone to attack at once, and even mocks Eftal for being a mere human trying to use magic. When Eftal does not chant, Abe laughs even harder, assuming he will be cut apart before finishing a spell. Unfortunately for him, the man standing there is practically the ancestor of chantless casting, something this era considers an exceptionally rare skill. The moment Abe finishes talking, a blue magic circle opens before Eftal's hand. 7th level magic, Overlord Wind, God Blade. With a single activation, the entire lawn becomes the center of a violent storm. All 300 guards charging forward are lifted off the ground at once. Wind tears through the courtyard, stone and earth erupt into the air, and even the mansion behind them is struck by the shockwave. The entire force is scattered in one spell while Eftal barely moves from where he stands. Anastasia remains completely unharmed behind him. A 300-man advantage disappears in a single cast. After landing in the ruined courtyard, Abe is still somehow refusing to shut up. He warns Eftal not to think this means victory, and claims that after attacking him, Eftal will not survive anywhere in demon territory. Just as Abe's pride is making one final attempt to stand back up, Merlin arrives. Threatening her master in front of her is probably not the smartest recovery plan. Merlin has brought evidence against House Portes. Ever since discovering the missing treasures, she traced where they were being sold and dug deeper into the family's activities. What she uncovered is somehow even darker than the false history they forced upon Brano Nova. Ports is not merely trafficking stolen treasures. The family is also connected to drug smuggling and maintains close relationships with the local mafia. From the outside, they present themselves as distinguished nobility. Open the books, and apparently every illegal business model is included. When Merlin mentions the mafia, Eftel casually remarks that he thinks he met several people matching that description earlier. Unfortunately, he may have accidentally blown them away together with the guards. Merlin looks down at Abe lying in the destroyed courtyard and delivers a simple conclusion. Someone like him has no place at Altena Academy. Using her authority as headmistress, she officially expels Abe Portes. Anastasia then takes Thunder Iron in both hands and returns it to Eftal, sincerely apologizing for stealing his sword and the other treasures. Eftal does not take her mistake and forge it into a new chain around her neck. He only asks whether she feels a little lighter now. Anastasia's eyes fill with tears. For years, she believed mistakes had to be repaid through obedience, and guilt had to be paid for with an entire lifetime. This is the first time someone has allowed her to correct a mistake without demanding that she turn herself into a sacrifice. Anastasia promises that from now on, she will never abandon herself again. Her life has to be something she chooses to live. Eftal can wipe out 300 soldiers with a single 7th level spell, but what he has been trying to give Anastasia was never a stronger master for her to depend on. He wants her to understand that she has the right to choose. Her older sister preserved that will, even while bound by the slave mark. Now Anastasia is finally beginning to do the same. The chain itself has not yet been broken, but for the first time, her will has stood back up. Merlin has already handed every crime committed by House Portes over to the Noble Affairs investigators, but what concerns Eftal most is still the special slave mark remaining on Anastasia's body. This time, he says outright that he intends to forcibly remove it. If he is going to save her, then he is going all the way. He refuses to leave that lock buried inside her body. Anastasia understands exactly how serious those words are. Forcibly destroying the mark means confronting the contract beast behind the spell, an existence worshipped by ordinary people almost like a god. Its power is said to be so immense that even an entire country might struggle to oppose it. Anastasia does not doubt Eftal. What frightens her is the thought that the person who has already saved her again and again will have to risk his life once more because of her. Realizing what she is worried about, Eftal calmly reminds her that once he promises to save someone, he intends to keep that promise. With that, he heads down to the basement to begin preparing the ritual. While Eftal handles the most dangerous part, Anastasia follows Merlin down to the treasure vault to deal with something she herself caused. She bows deeply and apologizes to the red-skinned vault-keeper for stealing the treasures earlier. Fortunately, the man is easygoing enough not to tear into her. He simply says that if Merlin and Eftal have already forgiven her, then he has no reason to keep dragging up the past. From now on, however, Anastasia must be accompanied by one of them whenever she enters the vault. Still feeling guilty, she volunteers to clean the place as compensation for all the trouble she caused. The vault keeper immediately warns her that this is not some storage room where she can casually touch whatever catches her eye. The place contains all kinds of dangerous magical tools and ancient curses, some of which even Merlin still does not fully understand. Naturally, the accident happens the moment he finishes saying that. A mouse runs past one of the shelves, triggering a strange artifact. Smoke floods the entire area, and when it finally clears, both Merlin and Anastasia have been transformed into children. The two stare at each other in complete silence. Merlin, of course, refuses to accept this situation for more than a few seconds. She immediately attempts a 6th level dispel. Her hand goes up. Her expression is perfect. The magic circle, however, is nowhere to be found. Only then does she realize that the curse has not merely turned her body younger, it has also completely sealed her mana. The interface may have become adorable, but the specs have been downgraded to useless. Meanwhile, Eftal is preparing the extremely important slave mark removal ritual. Merlin has no intention of dragging her master away from that because of one stupid accident in the vault. She remembers several records on ancient curses that were once brought to Altena Academy for research, so the two little girls decide to head there and find the solution themselves. The problem is that if a 400-year-old headmistress suddenly walks into her own academy looking like a child, the gossip will probably spread through the entire school before lunch. So now Merlin and Anastasia have to sneak into the very academy Merlin herself runs. The moment they reach the campus, the two hide behind a hedge to avoid the guards. The leaves rustle slightly, and the people outside immediately become suspicious. Just as they are about to be discovered, Merlin and Anastasia both start meowing like cats. The guards hear a few little meows from inside the bushes and actually walk away. Not long after getting inside, Merlin overhears two male students talking about Eftal. They admit that the transfer student is incredibly powerful, but still suspect that Merlin is showing favoritism. Even the recent changes to the Magic Swordsman curriculum are brought up as evidence. Then one of them casually calls the headmistress a damn old hag. Merlin's body may have become younger, but her pride is still factory sealed. She nearly jumps out from behind the bushes to demand who exactly they are calling old, only for the two students to leave before realizing that the woman they were insulting is standing right behind them. After surviving that encounter, the two run into Maria. The blonde elf student takes one look at Merlin and immediately notices that this little girl looks suspiciously similar to the headmistress. Merlin quickly improvises and claims that the two of them are relatives of Lady Merlin. Anastasia plays along just as quickly, explaining that they came to search for documents on ancient curses, but got lost. Instead of becoming more suspicious, Maria is impressed that two children this young are already studying such difficult material. She happily volunteers to guide them herself. They came here intending to infiltrate the academy and somehow end up receiving an official escort straight to their destination. Maria brings them to the headmistress's office and prepares to leave. Merlin is fairly confident because she still has the key. Then she inserts it into the lock and remembers one small problem. This door does not open with a normal key alone. It also requires mana from the person using it. Unfortunately, the rightful owner currently has exactly 0 mana. The headmistress is now standing outside her own office holding the correct key like someone with the password to an account that has already been locked. Merlin has no choice but to call Maria back. The girl is not annoyed in the slightest and happily supplies the mana needed to open the door for the two children. Once inside, Merlin quickly finds the ancient book they need. It looks like the problem is solved, until they discover that the book itself is also protected by a mana lock. Maria gets summoned a second time. She returns just as cheerfully as before, apparently enjoying the feeling of being relied upon by two adorable little girls. Today, Maria has officially become the team's entire support department. Thanks to Maria, Merlin and Anastasia finally managed to read the section concerning the curse. The ancient writing is unnecessarily complicated, but the main idea is that in order to dispel a curse covering the soul, one must clothe the body in the fresh fragrance of a juicy fruit. The accompanying illustration points towards something called Unitron. Maria recognizes the fruit and even offers to help them find it, but the two have already relied on her enough for one day and decide to handle the rest themselves. Maria simply tells them not to come back too late. Only after leaving the office does Anastasia admit that she always thought Maria was rather difficult to approach in class. After actually spending time with her, however, she realizes Maria is far kinder than her cold first impression suggested. It is the first time Anastasia has had the chance to see that side of her. Merlin merely smiles at the observation. The two search until evening before finally returning with an entire basket of Unitron. Then they run into the next problem. The book only says they need to clothe themselves in the fragrance of the fruit. It never explains what that actually means. Anastasia asks what they should do. Merlin thinks for a few seconds and suggests that perhaps eating it will work. Anastasia trusts her completely and immediately takes a huge bite. Her face twists the moment she tastes it. Only then does Merlin casually admit that she was just guessing. Anastasia turns toward her with an expression that could replace an entire page of dialogue. Maybe not a professor, but apparently Merlin has successfully found herself a free test subject. While the two are still arguing, Eftal appears behind them. He looks at their child-sized bodies and simply remarks that the two seem to have grown much closer. Anastasia and Merlin immediately apologize for running off without telling him while he was preparing the slave mark ritual. Eftal does not scold them much. He only tells them that next time something goes wrong, they should ask him first. They show him the Unitron and explain the clue. Eftal picks up one fruit and immediately tells them that it is not supposed to be eaten. Anastasia slowly turns her head toward Merlin. The 400-year-old archmage can only laugh awkwardly. This particular research method may have been a little reckless. The actual solution involves a hot spring. The following day, all three travel to the same spring they previously obtained as a reward from the treasure hunt. Unitron fruits are dropped into the water, filling the entire bath with their fragrance. Only now does the phrase, "clothe the body in its aroma," finally make sense. Merlin and Anastasia soak in the scented water and soon return to their adult forms. They spent an entire day sneaking into an academy, pretending to be cats, gathering fruit, and making Anastasia eat one raw, only to discover that the correct answer was simply putting the fruit in bathwater. Anastasia especially enjoys the hot spring because this is her first time truly experiencing one. Eftal also believes soaking in Unitron-infused water may help purify her body before the forced removal of the slave mark. The curse that made her smaller is gone, but the special mark on Anastasia remains completely unchanged. They are two entirely different problems. This trip is only preparation for the true ritual, not the end of it. The peaceful mood does not last long before Merlin enthusiastically offers to scrub her master's back. She begins standing up, and Eftal immediately panics and tells her to sit down because the view is starting to exceed acceptable limits. Merlin laughs and reminds him that she is his beloved disciple. The moment Anastasia hears the word disciple, her competitive instincts activate. She declares that she is also Eftal's disciple. Eftal turns toward her and asks when exactly that happened. Anastasia calmly explains that she just appointed herself. One woman wants to pamper her master, the other is fighting for a disciple slot, and Eftal only wants both of them to please remain seated. Later, Anastasia and Merlin have a chance to speak privately. The red-haired girl confirms that Eftal has already told her the truth. Her current master is actually the Thunder God Emperor from 400 years ago, reincarnated into the present era. Even after witnessing countless impossible things with her own eyes, Anastasia still has trouble processing the idea that someone could die and return centuries later. Merlin does not need to debate it at all. She studied under Eftal when she was still young. She remembers his mana, has fought him directly, and knows his spell construction and combat style far too well for someone else to fake them. Seeing how deeply Merlin understands Eftal, Anastasia admits that she feels slightly jealous. She has only known him for a short time, while Merlin possesses 400 years of memories connected to the same teacher. Unexpectedly, Merlin laughs. In reality, the person she is jealous of is Anastasia. From Merlin's perspective, Eftal treats the red-haired girl far more specially than most people. He has thrown himself into danger repeatedly to save her, and now he is preparing to confront a contract beast simply to sever the chain binding Bernova. Hearing that, Anastasia can no longer hide her real fear, but it is completely different from the way she felt before. She no longer believes that she is unworthy of being saved. What frightens her now is the possibility that Eftal could be hurt because of her. The girl who once closed her eyes and allowed fate to do whatever it wanted has now learned to worry about the person trying to protect her. Merlin does not offer empty reassurance. She simply asks Anastasia to remember what kind of man her master actually is. Someone born without magical aptitude who still climbed all the way to become the Thunder God Emperor. Someone who spent his entire life treating limits as problems waiting to be solved. Someone who literally died and reincarnated because he still was not finished with magic. Once Eftal accepts a task, almost nobody can make him turn back. Removing Anastasia's mark will be no different. Merlin believes he will succeed, and she intends to stand beside her master and support him. Anastasia finally relaxes a little and smiles, remarking that Merlin and Eftal really are alike. Once either of them decides something, they stubbornly follow it to the end. At least this time, Anastasia does not have to bow her head before something called fate. She has two extremely stubborn teacher and student magicians standing beside her. That evening, the three sit together drinking tea after returning from the hot spring. Eftal suddenly asks about something that has bothered him ever since reincarnating. Why are magicians of this era almost incapable of using high-level magic? He knows that magical civilization declined, but he has never understood why. Merlin asks whether her master has ever heard of the magic explosion. Eftal has not. The event occurred roughly 10 years after his death. Merlin explains that people at the time discovered ruins belonging to an incredibly ancient magical civilization. Inside was a mysterious magic stone tablet covered in strange symbols. A special investigation team was sent to study it, including research into how it might affect magical aptitude. During the investigation, however, an enormous explosion occurred for reasons nobody could determine. The magic stone tablet was destroyed in the disaster, and a wave of magical contamination subsequently spread across the entire world. After the magic explosion, magical power across the world noticeably declined. Spells of 9th level and above became almost impossible to cast, and the entire magical system continued weakening over time. That is why techniques Eftal considered basic knowledge 400 years ago are now treated as lost arts. The entire standard of magical power was dragged downward after the disaster. Eftal finally feels like one missing piece has fallen into place. He died before the magic explosion and reincarnated 400 years later while retaining the magical system from his previous life. That may explain why his ability to use 10th level magic was never reduced the way it was for people born after the disaster. For now, however, this remains only a theory between teacher and student. The fact that the Magic Stone tablet was destroyed during the explosion is also not enough to prove that the tablet itself caused the catastrophe. Even so, this information is extremely important for the plan directly ahead. Modern magicians can barely use 9th level magic or above, while Eftal can still throw around 10th level spells like they are routine. A contract beast worshipped as a god may be a nightmare for the weakened standards of the current age, but the magician about to stand before it still possesses the specifications of magic's golden era. In gaming terms, the entire server got nerfed in a massive balance patch. This old man died before the update and somehow logged back in 400 years later with his original stats untouched. Hearing all of this does not make Eftal reconsider for even a second. If anything, he becomes even more certain that the forced removal of the slave mark must proceed. He asks Merlin to assist him during the ritual, and his disciple agrees without hesitation. Watching the two of them, Anastasia finally feels some of her fear ease. What awaits them is still an existence worshipped like a god, and the battle ahead will undoubtedly be difficult.